Cardboard drones. Sounds like a joke, right? Yet, these unassuming creations have become a nightmare for Russian forces, capable of obliterating jets and turning the tide in modern warfare. How did something so simple become so deadly? Putin's plans for an easy victory in Ukraine were shattered by a new era of warfare. His pride in a supposedly modernized military and an impressive tank fleet couldn't withstand the relentless onslaught of large and small drones, transforming many of those tanks into smoldering ruins. Despite their experience from the Armenia-Azerbaijani conflict, the Russian invaders were woefully unprepared for the drone warfare they faced. By the second half of 2023, Russia sought to dominate the drone warfare arena, making significant strides. But in early 2024, Ukraine reclaimed its lead, refusing to rest on its laurels. With their nation's survival at stake, Ukrainians pushed innovation to its limits in the drone race. One of their groundbreaking innovations? The easily concealable cardboard drone. Dismissed by some as a mere gimmick, this drone has proven lethal, downing Russian jets and redefining combat strategies. Curious about how a cardboard drone, nicknamed the Origami of Death, could wield such power? Let's explore its design, operational use, and its profound implications for the future of drone warfare. As a preview for what this Origami of Death can do, it might be best to look at the words of one of Russia's military bloggers, who was writing in August 2023, shortly after $100 million worth of aircraft went up in smoke to a Ukrainian drone attack. Tonight, Ukrainians use them in a swarm, mixing drones with warheads with empty drones. I don't know exactly what engines were on the drones, but if they were electric-powered, then they were not launched from Ukraine. But these drones were indeed launched from Ukraine. What model actually caused such damage? The drone in question is called the Corvo Precision Payload Delivery System (PPDS), manufactured by an Australian company called SpyPack Systems in cooperation with the Australian Army. Australia has been a steady supporter of Ukraine in its resistance against Russian aggression, delivering a total of $960 million worth of aid in the first 2 years of the war. This aid has involved counter-drone systems like the Slinger kinetic defense system, which is designed to detect and shoot down fast-moving small drones. But the Australians are helping Ukraine in offensive aspects of drone warfare as well. In July 2022, the Australian government launched an initiative to supply Ukraine with the PPDS drone. The initiative was part of a $1.1 million contract, and SpyPack has been exporting the PPDS to Ukraine since March 2023, when the drone was revealed at the Avalon Air Show. SpyPack is shipping the units to Ukraine at a rate of at least 100 per month. Supplying Ukraine with the PPDS is SpyPack's only focus for that market, which is an indication of its success there. The company sells these drones in pizza box-sized containers that can carry 24 at a time. When they arrive in Ukraine, PPDS drones are stacked and flat-packed, an arrangement which makes them easy and efficient to deliver. 24 of the drones can come in one package. They are then assembled using rubber bands. The drones come with personalized launchers. These are small catapults that propel the PPDS into the sky. If no launcher is available, someone can throw it into the air. The company is understandably secretive about the material the PPDS is made from, but it seems that the drone isn't actually made of common cardboard, but rather a wax-coated foam board. It's also easily repairable because damaged parts can be replaced. For example, if the drone's nose cone gets hit, the operators can replace it with a spare. The drone can also be repaired with common tools like hot glue gun and tape, making them durable and easy to call upon in lean times. SpyPack says that the PPDS is designed for covert delivery, and perhaps more than any other drone on the market, the Origami of Death is well suited for such operations. It's designed to be stealthier than a normal drone. First, the PPDS has a size which helps to enhance its stealth profile. The central portion is about as big as a shoebox, while the wingspan is about 6.5 feet. More importantly, since the drone is made of a waxy cardboard-like substance, it's transparent to radar. The rise of stealth drones has been another innovation in UAV warfare since the conflict started. Toward the end of 2023, Russia began coloring some of its Shahid drones black to make them less visible to the eye. This coating was not just paint, but rather a specialized material to reduce visibility to radar. The Ukrainians and their Australian partners have taken this to another level with the PPDS. The drone is not completely stealthy because its electronic components, like the battery, can be detected. Nevertheless, it has a lower cross-section to radar thanks to its design and materials. The drone's operator controls the UAV through a specialized Android tablet that comes with the packaging. The PPDS can also fly autonomously if need be. It uses GPS guidance, but is resistant to jamming, because in the event the GPS goes down, the PPDS has control software that can calculate its location using the information from the drone's speed and trajectory. According to SpyPack's chief engineer Ross Osborne, the PPDS can also take weather conditions into account when deciding its flight path, landing pattern, and approach. The wax coating ensures that these drones can continue operating in damp conditions, maritime environments, and even rain, assuming it's not raining cats and dogs outside. When not attacking, the drone is designed to be reused. A single PPDS drone can be reused up to 60 times for reconnaissance and surveillance missions. The material the PPDS is made of also makes it more resistant to jamming than traditional drones. At a time when both sides of the war are recognizing the importance of jamming, the PPDS might prove more important in the next phase of the conflict and for the future of drone warfare as a whole. We'll discuss this more in detail later. For now, you might be wondering, why would someone come up with the idea for a so-called cardboard drone to begin with? Why was the PPDS conceived in the first place? The PPDS was originally designed for reconnaissance and to carry supplies to frontline positions. The drone weighs 5.3 pounds when empty and can carry a payload of 6.6 pounds. The payload bay has a cover that flips up to ensure the ease of retrieval by the receiver. It's propeller-driven and can reach speeds of 37 miles per hour. The PPDS has a reported range of 75 miles. However, as we'll soon see, there is good reason to think these drones can far exceed that distance, and this reveals the first clue about the need for a cardboard drone. The PPDS's design gives it a great advantage in range over the typical rotor-based small drones that Ukraine's pilots have long favored. This is because of its light weight and fixed wing configuration. There's less drag, greater energy efficiency, and the wings generate the lift. The PPDS can fly at higher altitudes than rotor drones as well, which can add to its ability to surprise the enemy. The PPDS can land within 2 meters of its intended destination. For surveillance, the original PPDS drone came with a camera placed within the top of its nose, just above the propeller. Aside from covert delivery and surveillance, low cost is one of the things SpyPack prioritized with this drone, and the second major reason why it chose such an unusual base material. The unit price is not available on SpyPack's website but reportedly ranges from between $670 to $3,350. Some of Ukraine's FPV drones are cheaper than this, but what makes the PPDS interesting from an economic standpoint is that it's considered a military-grade drone, according to Michael Partridge, a representative from the company. Other higher-end military-grade drones like the Shahid cost in the range of tens of thousands of dollars or more. Other military-grade drones, like the American MQ-9 Reaper, cost $30 million. Thanks to its design and construction, the PPDS drone can deliver military uses for much cheaper prices. It won't be nearly as powerful as a Shahid or a Reaper, but the low price doesn't mean this drone is ineffective. The Ukrainians have since weaponized it and turned it into an effective kamikaze drone. They began using the PPDS to attack Russian targets in June 2023, only 3 months after their initial arrival. Payloads can be of various forms of explosives, including cluster-type munitions. One Ukrainian test captured on video saw an airburst above a target that rained fragments over a broader area. This munition makes it a particularly good anti-personnel weapon, but it certainly has many anti-material uses as well, a fact which was proven in late August 2023. One of the drone's more notable feats came on August 27th, when Ukraine used the PPDS against an airbase at the historically significant site of Kursk, deep within Russian territory. Ukrainian sources reported that the strike hit a MiG-29 fighter jet and 4 Su-30 aircraft. The drones also damaged 2 Pantsir missile launchers and part of an S-300 air defense system. The governor of the Kursk area, Roman Starovoyt, claimed that an apartment block has also been damaged in the drone attack. Russian sources later confirmed that the drones that hit the Kursk airfield were designed like aircraft, which would suggest that they were indeed Ukraine's origami of death. Never content to rest on their laurels, Ukraine's drone pilots used the PPDS again on the 29th, striking another airbase in Pskov, 450 miles into Russian territory. 2 Russian cargo planes were destroyed in the attack and another 2 were damaged. The attack on Pskov was part of a broader drone wave attack between the 28th and 30th, which targeted 9 Russian regions, including Moscow. The PPDS might be the so-called cardboard drone and carry less of a payload than other military-grade drones, but it still forced the Russians to disperse their remaining aircraft off their runways in the aftermath of the attacks. Comically, images taken following these incidents showed the Russians resorting to putting stacks of tires on their aircraft to prevent them from taking damage from future drone strikes. Maybe the Russians think of them as an improvised, low-cost version of the cope cage. Less dramatically, the Ukrainians have used PPDS for its intended purpose of surveillance and resupply missions. It's an ideal system to deliver ammunition to hard-pressed troops on the front line, for example, where traditional methods could prove vulnerable to enemy fire. These drones are much harder to target and ideally suited for carrying small arms, magazines of ammunition, mortar rounds, medical supplies, communications equipment, spare parts, and other essentials for infantry squads that often get overlooked. Partridge mentioned that the PPDS is designed for a blood bag. By using the drones to deliver these lighter supplies to hard-pressed troops, Ukraine does not need to risk the destruction of more expensive and valuable military vehicles that cost a lot more money and can carry heavier equipment. The aforementioned attributes are not the final ones for the PPDS. Spypack is improving the drone based on feedback from its Ukrainian operators. A high-profile Ukrainian delegation, including Kyiv's ambassador to Australia, made a visit to Spypack in early 2023, shortly after the drones began arriving. The ambassador, Vasyl Maryshenko, was full of praise for the cardboard drone. "It looks like something that kids would play with, but when you see what it can do, it's really amazing. They've been very good at inflicting lots of damage on the enemy." The company itself suggests that the PPDS is still in development. Initial trials had to be halted thanks to the disruption brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. Initially, there was some interest in the PPDS among Middle Eastern countries, which wanted to use it as a cheap way of carrying weapons. However, the Ukrainians have obviously used it in far more complicated missions. The dialogue between the Ukrainian armed forces and Spypack has provided significant feedback, and the company is using it to improve the mission planning system, user interface, and ground control station, not just for the PPDS, but the entire line of Corvo drones. Partridge spoke about this collaboration with Defense News. The Ukrainians are using it in certain ways. The most effective way we're hearing about is they're literally cutting holes in the bottom and putting GoPros on 10-second timers. They've got active imagery that's 30 minutes old for a very cost-effective way of doing that. For reconnaissance and resupply missions, the GoPro cameras take these 10-second clips at the moment the drone reaches the turnaround point pre-programmed into the GPS. The Ukrainians' innovation with the GoPro cameras has added another stealthy quality to the PPDS. The quick flight and turnaround with the footage at the appropriate spot ensures there is no data link streaming the footage back to a command post. There is also no link required to give the PPDS its flight instructions. Although the lack of these data links mean that footage will not be live, it's much better for operational security, and things will most likely remain the same within 30 minutes, especially since these drones are hard to detect through visual methods or through radar in the first place. Ukraine used these methods to get accurate information about Russian positions in preparation for retaking territory in Zaporizhia. Although Ukraine failed in this offensive campaign, it still pierced the first two of Russia's defensive lines and inflicted more casualties on Russian forces, despite the latter being on the defensive. Accurate information about Russian positions was likely critical in the limited success that it had, especially when it came to neutralizing Russian tanks and artillery positions. Accurate information about Russian movements has also proven important in defensive operations, as it's permitted Ukraine to inflict heavy casualties on enemy forces in their westward drives, assisting in the war of attrition. In September 2023, Spypack released a new version of the PPDS with a longer wingspan and higher payload at 6 kilograms or 13.2 pounds. Although these new versions are easier for the eye to detect and likely to shoot down due to their larger size, the trade-off is that they can carry more supplies for troops on the front line or, more dramatically, more powerful explosives, all while being still made of the same cardboard-like material that reduces their visibility to radar and resistance to enemy jammers. The latter is an important point because Russia has begun to signal its intention of adapting its tanks to the new reality of drone warfare. Russia has lost thousands of tanks since the war started, and Ukraine's drones are one of the biggest reasons why. Russia understands the danger its armored units are in now though, which is why in early 2024, it began rolling out a new variant of its T-72 tank. Ukrainian soldiers identified this variant as the BIZZARE electronic warfare because of the jammers it sported on its frame. These are designed to interfere with the signals of incoming drones and, in theory, should work much better than the cope cages. Ukrainian troops were understandably concerned when they began identifying these. Ukrainian soldiers then captured one of these units in April and laughably found that the jammers didn't work because they were assembled in a hasty slapdash fashion. The antennas might have been made in a factory, but the assembly left something to be desired. They were jumbled together with rope and placed hastily on wooden pallets. The result was that the BIZZARE tank that made Ukraine's drone pilots so nervous was revealed as more of a gimmick than a genuine threat, not much better than a cope cage. For the moment, Russian tanks remain as vulnerable to drones as they have been. Russia's other units are also lacking when it comes to electronic drone countermeasures. Many of the jammers Russia needs to protect its infantry units on the line do not work. One popular jammer, a 2400 model promoted by the popular Two Majors Telegram channel, does not seem to be effective for several reasons. First, its antenna are pointed directly up, when most drones come in from the side, which means it loses most of its effectiveness. The jammer also has an inadequate cooling system, which consists of a single fan bolted to the interior of a plastic case. There is inadequate ventilation for the fan to draw in cooler air and expel hot air because of this design. The jammer is so hot that it can't be touched, and interior electronic components begin to melt, making it even less effective in countering enemy drones. So in protecting its tanks and infantry or artillery formations from Ukrainian UAVs, Russia is still lagging. Its electronic warfare systems are not up to the task. To make matters worse, there has been little communication between Russia's drone pilots and electronic warfare units, resulting in many of Russia's drones being downed by their own jammers. This was one of the reasons why Russia suffered so many casualties in the Battle of Avdiivka. However, Ukraine cannot count on such incompetence continuing forever. Russia has proven surprisingly resilient in learning from its mistakes and adapting on the battlefield. This was one of the major reasons why the Ukrainians' 2023 offensive failed to replicate the success of the year before. It's reasonable to assume that the Russians will improve on their electronic warfare measures if given enough time. This is where the PPDS comes in. The cardboard drone gives Ukraine more options to adapt in the face of improvements to Russia's electronic warfare capabilities. Future PPDS units being able to carry heavier payloads will also come in handy, since more powerful explosives will give Ukraine a better chance of destroying enemy tanks. Ukraine has also made it a priority to target Russian supply vehicles in the conflict to undermine enemy logistics. Using the PPDS in the face of improved jammers gives Ukraine another means of continuing with that mission. In December 2023, President Zelensky made the construction of at least 1 million small drones in 2024 one of his government's highest priorities. Ukraine was on track to surpass that total early. The PPDS might only make up a small portion of that goal, and its speed of 37 miles per hour might be lower than the other drones in Ukraine's arsenal. However, its stealth qualities, jamming resistance, and ease of assembly and replacement make it ideal for high-profile missions, like the attack on important bases in Russian territory, and the use of these newer drones might soon be coming to other parts of the world. According to SpyPack's founder George Vecino, Ukraine's success in using the PPDS has prompted interest from other countries, including the United States. This raises an interesting question. As drones become more ubiquitous on the battlefield, there will naturally be efforts to make them less detectable to radar and harder to jam. The PPDS has both of these qualities thanks to its unusual materials. So is the PPDS a sign of things to come? Will future drones be made of alternative materials to make them miniature stealth aircraft, more difficult for radar to see and harder for steadily more sophisticated jammers to bring down? There are now more landmines in Ukraine than almost anywhere else in the world. That's the headline that screamed from a November 2023 piece published by Vox, which went on to point out that mines are among the most underappreciated threats that Ukraine faces in its war with Russia. Red signs marked with skulls litter the Ukrainian landscape, warning soldiers and civilians alike that landmines are in the area. Ukraine isn't even safe when it retakes territory from Russia. Both as a defensive ploy and to damage Ukraine's troops as they move back in, Russia has taken to installing mines in the territory it's occupied to stifle the Ukrainian resistance. Anti-tank mines are buried in the ground, ready to trigger as they feel the weight of a tank, or in worse cases, a bus full of civilians riding over them. Booby traps are built into buildings and on disputed territory, with anti-personnel mines designed to maim and kill. Even at the more makeshift end of the spectrum, there are improvised explosives, cluster munitions, and unexploded artillery littering the Ukrainian landscape. How much of that landscape? About 67,180 square miles of it, an area roughly the size of Florida, according to Vox. So with such a massive mine threat being presented, the question becomes simple. What is Ukraine doing to tackle the landmines that are scattered all over its territory? There are many answers, some of which we'll dig into later, but one of the methods used is among the most novel methods of landmine clearing yet. Rather than relying on the latest and greatest technology, there's a small group of Ukrainians who are going back to using a form of technology that was never intended for clearing mines at all. Those groups have gone all the way back to the farmyards, and they've discovered that tractors are surprisingly powerful tools in the war against Russian landmines. In May 2023, the UK newspaper The Sun published a video on its YouTube channel. The video appears fairly innocuous, if a little weird at first. It shows a man camping out in what appears to be an excavator's bucket, which has been elevated off the ground. A lookout perhaps. It's unclear from the footage, though it's a hint that some extremely creative everyday Ukrainians have come up with a novel way to deal with the landmine problem on their land. The footage then cuts to a huge mechanical plow appearing to till a field, only that footage isn't what it appears. A shot from inside the cabin shows that the plow is unmanned and has been rigged to drive forward in a straight line with no human intervention. There's a method to the madness, of course. As the video progresses, we meet a Ukrainian farmer who tells The Sun that one of his tractors ran over an anti-tank mine. That's when he made a startling discovery. Though the mine destroyed the protective plates and much of its mechanics, the vehicle itself was safe. Those driving the tractor were unharmed. "Everyone's alive and safe," says the farmer, and the vehicle was quickly restored to head back out into the minefield. But the incident gave the farmer an idea. With that, the footage cuts back to a front shot of the supposed plow shown earlier, which shows that the vehicle isn't a plow at all. Instead, it's a tractor that appears to have been jerry-rigged with improvised armor at the front, which is running back and forth across the farmer's field on the hunt for mines. A solid metal barricade is built onto the front of the vehicle, elevated slightly on rollers to keep the tractor moving, and what appears to be two 4x4s are stacked and tied onto the sides, presumably to act as a shield for the tractor if it finds a landmine. Finally, we see the excavator from the start of the video again. The man still lies in position, appearing to control the tractor with some sort of mechanism installed in the excavator's barrel. He has a small table and chair set up, giving him a wide-open view of the field as he coordinates the tractor's movements and turns while it's on its mine-sweeping duty, all as he follows in its wake. The footage cuts back to the farmer. He explains that the reason he built this novel anti-mine solution, outside of the unexpected discovery that it would work, is that the time has come to start sowing crops. His problem was that he couldn't move forward with that work because of the risk that mines buried in his land posed. "The emergency services are very busy," he explains, understandably so given the situation in Ukraine. But his important work similarly can't wait. So rather than sit around and hope that the emergency services could send some sort of minesweeping equipment to his farm, he uses the experience he gained, watching one of his tractors survive an anti-tank explosion, to create his own solutions. "We took the front metal parts from a Russian tank that was hit on the crossroads," he explains, while talking about the unique contraption he created. Those metal parts form the bulk of the tractor's defenses, with the farmer previously seen in the excavator barrel, then shown on the ground with remote control in hand, guiding the tractor's movements. In essence, the farmer has created an unmanned ground vehicle, or UGV, with little more than scraps of metal and some amazing Ukrainian ingenuity. The footage cuts away to another man, who explains the scale of the problem Ukraine's farmers face. He says that the amount of land that they need to cover and demine is huge. "It would take years to demine this particular field by hand and to guarantee that there are no mines here," he says before the footage cuts back to the improvised tractor. "The wireless tractor is a very good idea," the man explains, "because there is no human inside. The risk to the life of the mechanic is negated. The tractor also clears far more territory far faster than that same land can be cleared by hand. It's also more reliable, at least in terms of getting rid of anti-tank mines. After all, it's possible to miss these mines when searching by hand because they're designed to only trigger when a heavy weight is placed upon them. The tractor provides that weight, meaning it's guaranteed to set off an anti-tank mine if it encounters one." That same person explains the true scale of the problem. "We learned that he is in Kharkiv, a region that Russia has been bombing since at least May 2024, despite assurances from Russian President Vladimir Putin that he has no interest in attacking the region. That month saw somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 soldiers cross the border between Kharkiv and Russia at two key points, according to The Guardian, and the region has been under siege ever since. More Russian men are pouring in. Kharkiv is being battered with artillery, and as the farmers and military personnel in the Sun's video explain, their land is now being littered with Russian landmines. "I removed around 500 anti-tank mines and numerous anti-personnel mines in this field," claimed the man, showcasing just how difficult Russia is making it for Ukraine's farmers to do their work. Don't underestimate the importance of this tactic. According to Statista, agriculture accounted for 8.2% of Ukraine's GDP in 2022, a figure that's likely decreased substantially with Russia littering the country's farmland with landmines. The video ends with footage of the unique tractor driving through shelled-out areas of Kharkiv. Broken buildings line the landscape, serving as a reminder that, for as novel as the farmer's anti-mine solution may be, he's still living and working in a region that's under constant threat of Russian attack. Reporting on the same farmer in May 2023, Reuters is able to offer more details. It names the farmer as Alexander Kristov, who is the general manager of his own agricultural company. Kristov lives in Rakova, a village that Russia managed to occupy during the early months of the war, before a Ukrainian counteroffensive pushed the war's front lines back and gave Kristov a chance to continue his work. The report also quotes Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, who claims that the problem Kristov faces is far from unique. Russia has planted mines in about 30% of Ukraine's territory. Shmyhal says that Ukraine is working hard to demine its agricultural land, likely with the goal of getting its agricultural sector back up and running, even in a faltering capacity, but the scope of the work is enormous. Other farmers face similar problems. In June 2023, The Guardian similarly ran a report on the farmers and their unique solution to the Russian mine problem. It pointed out that farmland has been a clear target for Russia since the war's beginning. For instance, it spoke to one farmer who said that in the weeks that Russia occupied the Husarivka dairy farm, they've slaughtered 2,500 heads of cattle. Most died due to artillery fire or the Russians simply using them as target practice. The farm's deputy manager, Serhiy Forobyov, claims that the cows that weren't killed were instead starved. The farmers were forced to abandon their land when the Russians came, with Forobyov noting that some of the cows became so hungry that they started to eat their own tails for sustenance. Now, he says, they're just like the soldiers who've been on the front line. They're scared if you just go near them. When his farm was finally liberated by Ukrainian soldiers, Forobyov claims there were cow carcasses as far as the eye could see. And even with Russian soldiers gone, he now faces the same problem as so many other Ukrainian farmers: mines in his land. The farm's 230 surviving cows can't be put out to pasture because of the mines, as they could theoretically trigger them. Plus, with so many buildings ruined, it's likely that Forobyov's farm will never be the same again. When we mentioned that the threat of Russia's mines often goes underappreciated at the beginning of the video, this is what we meant. Obviously, landmines present a clear risk to soldiers when attacking fortified locations, as well as to Ukrainian tanks and vehicles. Russia is using them in that capacity, somewhat expected for such a large war, but it's through this secondary strategy of laying mines on farmland that Russia can terrorize Ukrainian civilians even long after they've been pushed out of territory they'd previously taken. Russia is trying to ruin Ukraine's agricultural industry, all while potentially killing civilians whose only crime would be to return to the land that was previously taken from them. All of this brings us to a question: just how is Russia using landmines to hurt Ukraine? We've covered some of the basics already, but it's clear that these attacks on agricultural lands aren't accidental. They're a defined tactic, one that the Halo Trust says is extremely effective. The Halo Trust is an anti-landmine charity that focuses on clearing mines and similar explosives to help countries rebound after they've experienced armed conflict. Of course, the Trust has been extremely active in Ukraine since the beginning of Putin's special military operation, with its head of region in Europe, Mike Newton, noting that Russia's use of landmines on agricultural ground is a definite strategy. A large part of the economy of Ukraine has collapsed, Newton says, echoing the previous statistic about how agriculture makes up 8.2% of the country's GDP. Ukraine is traditionally one of the breadbaskets of the world, but the country's prime agricultural land has been decimated by bombs, artillery, shells, and landmines, he says. Those landmines have to be removed if Ukraine is to be rebuilt. The Halo Trust believes that it's a gargantuan task. Beyond the sheer amount of land that these mines have been installed into, it believes that there may be up to 2 million of the explosives dotted around Ukraine. For all its hard work, the Halo Trust has barely put a dent in that number. Its highly trained deminers have been scouring Ukraine by hand, with that slow and steady effort leading to the clearing of just 19,000 landmines and similar unexploded munitions. Their work is currently focused on more built-up areas, with schoolyards, pathways, housing estates, and fields combining to form the majority of the Halo Trust's work. The mere mention of schoolyards there should give you pause for thought. The Trust is clearing mines away from locations that are meant for children. Human Rights Watch, or HRW, delves into even more detail. In June 2023, it published a report covering the full use of landmines in Ukraine. It notes that the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty prohibits the use of anti-personnel mines that are capable of killing or injuring people, a ban Russia is clearly violating. Of course, it's also worth noting that Russia never signed the treaty, with China, the US, and over 20 other nations also not being signatories. HRW says that Russia is known to have used at least 13 types of anti-personnel mines in Ukraine since the war began, though Ukraine isn't innocent in breaking the act either. It's using rocket launchers to fire PFM anti-personnel blast mines, meaning it's essentially fighting fire with fire in its war with Russia. Ukraine, by the way, is a signatory of the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty. On top of this, Russia is using at least 6 types of anti-vehicle mines, allowed under the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty, as well as several types of improvised booby traps that are typically set up in places that Russia had fortified before being driven away. The majority of the anti-personnel mines Russia uses are fragmentation mines, meaning they explode in such a way with shrapnel flying in multiple directions. A couple, including the PFM-1, PMN-2, and PMN-4, are blast mines designed to cause severe injury or death to a single person, typically when that person places pressure on the mine. Rather than adapting to meet Ukrainian resilience head-on, Russia's response has been to escalate the use of increasingly inhumane tactics. The so-called creativity in their landmine usage only highlights Putin's desperation in the face of Ukraine's unyielding strength. In February 2024, NBC News reported on the landmine situation in Ukraine, noting that Russia has started using a deadly new type of anti-personnel mine called the POM-3. In addition to detonating when pressure is placed upon it, much like a traditional mine, the POM-3 is equipped with seismic sensors that can recognize vibrations in the ground. Those vibrations could be caused by soldiers marching, vehicles driving, or simply farmers attempting to prepare their land for planting. These seismic sensors make the mines much more difficult to both locate and disarm, as they're designed to explode before a person actually touches them. When the POM-3 detects vibrations in the ground, it fires an explosive about the size of a soft drink can into the air. This explosive releases metal fragments, firing them far and wide to take out any people in the vicinity. It's a terrifying weapon. And it shows just how far Russia is willing to go to hurt Ukrainians, any Ukrainians, in its effort to complete Putin's special military operation. Hurting Ukrainians is exactly what these mines have achieved. Landmines have been a problem in Ukraine even before the special military operation began. Between 2014, the same year Russia annexed Crimea, and 2020, Ukraine experienced 1,190 casualties related to landmines, amounting to about 170 casualties per year. That number has increased markedly since the beginning of the war, with the period between February 2022 and July 23 resulting in 298 civilian casualties, with 22 of those being children. That's on top of 632 civilian injuries, and without mentioning the many more soldiers that have been caught by landmines or Russia's improvised booby traps. Worst of all, the Halo Trust believes that the civilian numbers are massively underreported, meaning it's very possible that hundreds more Ukrainians have died due to Russian mines. Statista breaks down the numbers and offers some more interesting details to illustrate just how widespread landmine usage has become since the beginning of the war. It suggests that the period between April and December 2014 saw 40 Ukrainian civilians killed and another 40 injured by mines. Those numbers rose considerably in 2015, in the immediate aftermath of the Crimea annexation, to 123 killed and 240 injured. The next 2 years also saw significant landmine deaths, with 122 deaths and 361 injuries between 2016 and 17. The numbers taper off from around 2018 through 22, though Ukraine still hit double-digit mine-related deaths in all of those years. Then 2022 saw the numbers rocket back up to 223 deaths and 374 injuries from landmines. The numbers for 2023 were just as bad, with 116 deaths and 383 injuries. And remember, as the Halo Trust points out, these are just the reported numbers. There are likely many more civilians dead, not to mention the many soldiers that have likely been caught up by Russia's explosive traps. Suddenly, the farmer's innovative remote-controlled tractor seems less like a novelty and more of a necessity. A way for that farmer to protect himself and his workers from the scourge of landmines that have been laid in his field. Of course, this doesn't mean we're going to see fleets of remote-controlled tractors patrolling the fields and countrysides of Ukraine anytime soon. That's impractical and requires hundreds of people to demonstrate the same ingenuity that Alexander Kristov displayed. That's not to mention the sheer number of tractors required, as well as the luck of running across a destroyed Russian tank. So what other methods is Ukraine using to tackle the problem? Many, as it happens, with most of them being far more technologically advanced than the armored tractor Kristov created. For instance, Putin's special military operation marks the first time that artificial intelligence, or AI, has been used to detect landmines. In April 2024, IEEE Spectrum reported on a startup company called SafePro AI. That company was called to a 25-hectare field, the same size as 62 American football fields, to test a new drone-based technology it developed. The task was simple. The UN would spread between 50 and 100 inert mines across the field. SafePro AI then had to use its drones, which are powered by the company's machine learning software, to detect as many of those mines as possible in 72 hours. The drones took just 5 hours. By the end, they gathered over 15,000 images, all later used to further train the machine learning model that powers them. A further 2 hours of coding led to that model crunching through the visual data. Sadly, the model wasn't capable of producing a map with precise coordinates for each suspected landmine. So SafePro AI adapted and instead had it create a map highlighting the general suspected locations of each mine. An imperfect solution perhaps, but one that would certainly be useful to Ukrainians in their efforts to disarm mines or to simply keep people away from areas believed to contain the weapons. Finally, SafePro AI successfully identified the general locations of 74 mines and was invited back by the UN to conduct more tests. It's not the only AI company that's using its technology to help clear landmines in Ukraine. In June 2024, AI Magazine ran a piece on Amazon Web Services, or AWS, which has teamed up with the previously mentioned Halo Trust to work on ways to use AI and machine learning to identify mines in Ukraine. AWS has invested $4 million into the project, which has seen the Halo Trust take a similar approach to SafePro AI in using drones to scan the Ukrainian landscape. In this case, the landmine clearing organization has a fleet of 542 drones, which have collectively captured around 11 terabytes of high-resolution images to be fed into the AWS machine learning models to help it detect landmines. The Halo Trust is also using AWS models to examine satellite imagery to locate damaged buildings, with that damage also being a possible indicator of landmines in a location. Neither of these technologies is a finished product, by the way. But just as Russia is building landmines that contain seismic sensors, using modern technology to make their landmines more dangerous than ever, so are other organizations using more advanced technology to detect those new landmines. Still, the widespread use of AI to find mines is something that we may not see until later in the war. What about the other things that Ukraine is doing to find the mines in its territory? Metal detectors are still the most common methods for finding mines, along with landmine probes and animals that are capable of sniffing out explosives. That's according to Tim Bechtel, who's a geophysicist at Pennsylvania's Franklin and Marshall College. He's working alongside NATO scientists to develop a new form of metal detector, a fleet of autonomous robots that can handle the detection part for humans so that they only have to put themselves at risk while deactivating the mines. Bechtel says, the most common anti-vehicle mine is the TM62M. It's got a metal casing, so it's very easily found with a metal detector. Anti-personnel mines are a lot smaller, but most of the Russian mines, even if they have plastic casings, still contain significant metal. Using metal detectors to find these mines is risky, even when robots are thrown into the mix. And of course, 4 robots can't cover the massive territory in which Russia has installed mines in Ukraine. Still, it's one more solution, adding to the ever-growing pile. Another comes back to drones. The Smithsonian magazine says that a 17-year-old engineer named Igor Klimenko has cooked up his own drone-based solution to dealing with landmines. The outbreak of the Ukraine war caused him to revisit a passion project from his past, resulting in him creating a drone capable of not only detecting unexploded landmines, but sending their precise coordinates to the user. The result was his quadcopter mines detector, a project on which he worked with programmers and scientists while finishing his senior year of high school, which now has a pair of patents and 2 working prototypes. The prototypes earned Klimenko the Chegg.org Global Student Prize, which comes with a $100,000 prize for making an impact on the lives of his peers. The drone combines traditional metal detecting methods with drone technology. Using an F5 Pro quadcopter as the base, Klimenko essentially strapped a metal detector to the bottom, which hangs suspended underneath as the drone flies. From there, the drone can stay suspended for up to 30 minutes and travel up to 5 miles, picking up on landmines as it goes. More investments and refined technology solutions could improve both of those limitations in time. But as it stands, Klimenko's drone is yet another example of the ingenuity of the Ukrainian people in the face of Russia's mine threat. Then there are the mine-clearing monsters. That's what Real Clear Defense calls a host of Western devices that have been sent into Ukraine to help it combat the scourge of mines in its territory. These devices, of which there are about 100, take one of 2 forms. There's a plow clearing machine, which is somewhat similar to the jerry-rigged tractor solution that plows the land to uproot mines. One example is the American M1150, which has the same chassis as an Abrams tank and is capable of throwing down M58 Miklik explosive lines up to 328 feet in front of itself to clear a path. Unfortunately, these plow machines are loud and bulky. The M1150 weighs over 70 tons, making them easy targets for Russian missiles and artillery. The other mine-clearing monster uses flails, with Germany's Wiznet 1 being a prime example. Like the M1150, it's built using a tank chassis, a Leopard instead of an Abrams, but it's lighter at 44 tons and uses a series of flails to whip the ground and explode any mines it finds. Ukraine has 56 of these Wiznet 1s, which can move at top speeds of 31 miles per hour. Unfortunately, they also offer an imperfect solution, as they only have a typical clearance rate of between 50 and 60% of mines in an area. Still, there are yet more tools Ukraine can add to its demining arsenal. And if all of that doesn't work, the country can take another approach. If you can't beat them, join them. Given that Russia is peppering Ukraine's landscape with mines to take out vehicles and tanks, Ukraine has taken to using the same tactic. In February 2023, Forbes writer David Axe reported that Ukrainian soldiers have started relaying mines in old minefields that Russian soldiers have previously cleared, essentially creating a field of fresh mines ready to explode when Russia attempts to cross. This leads to a pattern wherein a lead Russian vehicle will get taken out by a mine the Russians believe they'd cleared, with the vehicle dramatically exploding. The rest of the tank column ends up scattering, with some attempting to go around the lead vehicle while others go in different directions, only to run into more mines. Even a retreat is made more challenging, as there could be more mines that have been relayed behind the tanks after they progressed. Add the scattering of more mines into these old fields from the air, and you have a dangerous combination that's claimed the lives of hundreds of Russian soldiers so far. Still, it's a tactic that only makes the issues of landmines in Ukraine worse, even if the Ukrainians know where these fresh mines are being placed. Where does all of this leave us? Russia clearly sees landmines, both anti-personnel and anti-tank, as a key way to not only fight against Ukrainian soldiers, but to wreak havoc among its civilian population. That tactic has forced levels of ingenuity rarely seen in times of war. Of course, there are more militaristic and technological methods being developed to take out these mines. AI is slowly proving itself useful in detection, though it requires further development. And with the mine-clearing monsters coming in from the west, Ukraine at least has a handful of machines that are capable of clearing mines faster than can be done by hand with traditional metal detectors. But it's the everyday citizens who are coming up with their own solutions that are most impressive. Some of those solutions combine modern technology with traditional mine-clearing techniques, such as we see with Igor Klemenko's metal-detecting drones. But even in the absence of that technology, people like Alexander Kristov are figuring out ways to use what they have available to make their land a little safer. His combination of a tractor, old Russian tank armor, and an impressive remote control system means that he's able to detect mines on his land, get rid of them, and start working again within an agricultural sector that is on its knees due to the Russian invasion. Perhaps we'll see variations of his tractor in wider use in the future. But for now, we want to hear your opinions. What do you think about Ukraine's mine-detecting tractor, and how much of a role do you think mines will play both during and after the Ukraine war? What does it take to fight off a superpower? When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, many observers and analysts assumed the war would be over quickly. As Russian troops massed on the border, stormed into the country and laid siege to Kyiv, it seemed like only a matter of time until Vladimir Putin was in control of his smaller neighbor. But against the odds, Ukraine's armed forces defended their territory and began to win victory after victory. How did they do it? All year, social media has been filled with home videos of the many ways that soldiers and civilians alike have countered the bigger, better-equipped Russian military. One of these has been repurposing salvaged equipment from defeated Russian forces, old Soviet leftovers, and even abandoned civilian homes. This has long been a tactic of underdogs in war, but here's how Ukrainians have taken the practice to a whole new level. Since the beginning of the conflict, large amounts of machinery have been left behind, captured, or shipped into the country. Now, in scenes resembling the weaponized steampunk vehicles from the movie Mad Max, Ukrainian soldiers have turned a range of civilian cars, trucks, tractors, and dune buggies into fearsome tools of combat. Armed to the teeth, these quickly constructed weapons have been inflicting some serious damage on Russian troops all year long. Valuable against both tanks and aircraft, they can function in nearly any condition, firing and racing away before they can be targeted. Civilian vehicles mounted with firepower are nothing new. In fact, they've been around almost as long as cars themselves. But the modern variety, known as technicals, were pioneered in places like Afghanistan, Libya, and Somalia during the 1990s. Originally a tool of armed groups without access to proper military hardware, they became a tool of governments during the early days of the US-led War on Terror. US and British special forces began using technicals extensively to counter the Taliban in Afghanistan, as they could navigate places with little to no infrastructure. Gradually, the technical became a key part of special operations, while also retaining its value to less equipped forces. But with sufficient military hardware at their disposal, why are Ukrainian forces utilizing technicals? While most lack the armor of a tank, technicals are fast and cheap. This makes them perfect for waging asymmetric warfare against a stronger enemy. They also do well in hard-to-reach areas, since technicals are much easier to find parts for and repair than traditional military hardware like tanks or Humvees. The war has left Ukraine filled with vehicles, many perfect for conversion into these deadly machines. And while they've recently stepped up their efforts, the story of Ukraine's creative technicals goes all the way back to 2014. After Russia annexed Crimea that year, Ukraine's volunteer battalions began to assemble a fleet of homemade war vehicles. These were often put together in abandoned industrial warehouses. Using scrap metal and old Soviet parts, the battalions began to retrofit everything they could get their hands on in preparation for more Russian aggression. Many of their early models resembled reinforced tanks, focusing on extremely heavy armor over mobility to try and hold a precarious front line. But as the prospect of a full-scale invasion loomed, Ukraine's production of light technicals greatly increased. When full-scale war finally arrived, millions fled their homes, fearing for their lives. The exodus left a huge collection of cars, trucks, tractors, and other automotives abandoned across the country. Many more modern vehicles were also donated from abroad, including armor-plated pickup trucks and SUVs. In the weeks after the invasion, dozens more small, crowd-funded factories were established inside and outside Ukraine's borders. There, volunteers attach weapons and armor plating to technicals and send them to the front line. While it can slow the cars down, the extra layer of armor on a technical is crucial as it can save those inside from shrapnel or other deadly hazards. Among the most successful of these retrofitting operations is Cars for Ukraine, run by Ivan Oleski, a 25-year-old esports analyst originally from Kherson. Started in March, his venture has created dozens of technicals from cars around Europe. They can purchase each truck for under $6,000 and quickly transform them into fearsome weapons of war. Each is also a statement of patriotic intent, painted with a Ukrainian flag and a now popular slogan from early in the war, "Russian warships, go f*** yourselves." But this is just one among dozens of operations, many of which are using extremely innovative designs for their technicals. While almost anything with wheels can be made into a technical, they have traditionally been constructed from light flatbeds and pickup trucks. Mitsubishi L200s are reportedly among the most desirable cars for technicals in the Ukraine, along with the Ford Ranger and Toyota Hilux models. All of these are known for their durability and easy handling. This is crucial for quickly escaping enemy fire and navigating areas with unpredictable terrain and weather conditions. Ukrainian technicals have also been seen sporting a massive range of weaponry, including machine guns, drones, and multi-rocket launch systems. Many of these were taken from defeated Russian forces. This has led to some eye-catching results all across the internet. A recent taunting video from Ukraine's defense ministry shows a Russian helicopter rocket launcher attached to the back of one such Mitsubishi truck. In another instance, a dilapidated Soviet-era Volga sedan was mounted with a remote-controlled 14.5mm heavy machine gun. While both the car and machine gun are dated, they have been integrated with the modern remote control system. Clever designs like this have helped Ukraine reduce its battlefield casualties, while inflicting substantial damage on the often unprepared Russian military. Another group of soldiers were filmed using an automatic Soviet 2B9 Vasilek 82mm mortar from the back of a farm truck. The Vasilek is usually based on a small, wheeled carriage and can rapidly fire armor-piercing shells with 75-gram warheads capable of penetrating 100mm of plating. While Soviet weapons like these are decades old, they can still dish out punishing firepower. This is especially true when mounted on a technical, giving the mortar far more versatility than the standard ground-based model. Others are more flashy, like this BMW technical, complete with a Ukrainian-themed paint job and truck-mounted machine gun. And it's not just domestic and Soviet-made weapons either. Western military support has also given Ukraine hundreds of powerful modern weapon systems like Stingers, howitzers, and Javelin anti-tank missiles. Ukrainian soldiers have been making the most of this new equipment. One unit has been using a flatbed technical to transport mobile anti-aircraft teams armed with Stingers. After spotting a target, the soldiers can be seen quickly dismounting, firing, and returning to the vehicle to make their getaway. Another creative unit applied the tactic to the ground, making their Peugeot truck into a mobile hunter-killer anti-tank platform using javelins. The key feature of all of these models is their ability to quickly escape, before Russian artillery can target them with retaliatory strikes. But it doesn't end there. Recently, it seems that Ukrainian technicals have also moved beyond regular civilian vehicles. Pictures and videos have emerged of soldiers using heavily armored dune buggies, painted in dark green camo and studded with weapons. Several of these vehicles were recently seen near the strategic city of Izium, complete with Stugna P anti-tank guided missiles attached to the roof. The Ukrainian-designed Stugna system has a range of over 3 miles, and its missiles can be remotely guided by console or laser-targeted manually. They can also carry many different types of warheads, including tandem-style rounds designed to break tank armor, high-explosive fragmentation, and even thermobaric payloads. The Stugna is usually fired from a tripod on the ground, requiring 2 to 4 soldiers to reload and move the unit. But mounting the anti-tank weapons on a technical gives them far more flexibility, allowing them to be used for hit-and-run missions. But Ukraine's ingenuity doesn't end there. A similar domestically produced missile system, the RK-3 Corsair, was seen on a buggy in another part of the country earlier this summer. Usually ground-based like the Stugna, Corsair systems have a range of 1.5 miles and can also use a range of different shells. Even lighter than pickup trucks, these deadly dune buggies have become invaluable to Ukrainian troops as the war has moved into the eastern part of the country. Many other rocket launchers have also been spotted on Ukraine's buggies, including dated Soviet weaponry. For instance, one video shows a buggy covered in camouflage netting firing a 9M111 Faget wire-guided missile system. These buggies themselves are pretty badass too. They appear to be from a range of models. Some are likely modified versions of the Ranger or MRZR models produced by US defense contractor Polaris. In their off-the-shelf form, these vehicles are intended for reconnaissance and logistics missions rather than open combat. Depending on the model, the Polaris dune buggies have over 100 to 200 horsepower and over a 2,000-pound payload capacity. Despite being very light and maneuverable, they also have an extremely durable chassis and strong suspension, making them ideal for navigating difficult areas. But Ukrainians also appear to have reinforced theirs with body armor and camouflage for extra protection against Russian fire. Other Ukrainian buggies have been far more homemade. One, captured in a photograph by the Associated Press, was constructed from a Peugeot 307 coupe convertible and with the doors and windows removed. While not a tactical vehicle like the Polaris buggies, the Peugeot 307 is still fast, able to go from 0 to 60 in 8 to 10 seconds. Speed is crucial for Ukraine's technicals, especially for the country's rapid counter-offensives in recent months. The buggy hosting the Corsair missile system is yet another model. This variety of buggy also seems to have been domestically manufactured. It has 2 seats in front and a cargo platform at the rear of the vehicle, fitted with a tripod and optics for the Corsair missile system. On the road, 2 missiles are carried in storage boxes at the back for easy retrieval and use. But how have these strange-looking dune buggies and other technicals helped Ukraine hold its own against Russian tanks and artillery? Early in the war, they played a part in helping Ukrainians repel Russia's initial push into Kyiv. Their high maneuverability proved much better at urban combat than cumbersome tanks. And after the Russian offensive failed, the fighting moved east, shifting into a heavy artillery war in the Donbass and Luhansk regions. For a number of reasons, technicals have been even more important in this context. Despite its battlefield victories, Ukraine has been heavily outgunned by Russia all year. While this has started to change thanks to the influx of Western weaponry, Russia's enormous guns can still easily destroy slow-moving and immobile targets. But by attaching their firepower to technicals, Ukraine has made their artillery much harder to destroy. Another advantage has to do with geography. While the eastern part of Ukraine is relatively flat, it is crisscrossed with rivers and has fewer major roads than the west. This means that much of the fighting is taking place in the countryside, where technicals have a substantial mobility advantage over tanks. Russian tank losses have been enormous, and by mid-October they had lost nearly 1,400 tanks, averaging nearly 10 a day. Ukraine's inventive use of technicals has contributed to these startling numbers. Whatever course the war may take this winter, it seems likely that technicals will remain a key part of Ukrainian operations due to their speed, flexibility, and low cost. While they certainly look like something out of a dystopian universe, these vehicles have proven themselves to be extremely effective in real-life combat. And just as they have gotten more inventive since the beginning of the war, Ukraine's technicals will probably keep evolving as they receive new and more lethal weapons from the West. Ever thought of strapping a helicopter rocket launcher to the back of a Mitsubishi truck? Well, as you can see here, Ukrainian fighters have. There is no escape from Ukrainian weaponized civilian Mad Max vehicles. But if you see something like this Soviet-era Volga sedan mounted with a remote-controlled 14.5mm heavy machine gun rampaging your way, you should definitely at least give it a shot. And if you think these trucks are strange, wait till we show you what this 1940 SVT-40 Soviet semi-automatic battle rifle can do. Don't be fooled by its vintage look. This gun is far from being ready to be retired. The Russo-Ukraine war has definitely been producing some of the weirdest weapons we've seen fielded in recent history, maybe even ever. But how weird can it get? Join us as we dive into this rabbit hole and reveal the good, the bad, and the downright strange weapons seeing use in Ukraine, starting with oldies but goodies. It's a common misconception that the newest weapons are the best in modern warfare. Futuristic weapons sporting next-generation designs and big capability promises tend to attract the most public attention. But the war in Ukraine has proven that it's the workhorses, the time-tested OGs, that actually get the job done. In Russia and Ukraine's case, Soviet-era weapons have dominated the battlefield primarily by virtue of their sheer availability and ease of use. This doesn't mean they aren't good. Ukraine's Soviet-era defenses like the S-300 and Buk M1 here, for example, seem to have done an excellent job blunting Russian firepower. The AK-74 and all its variants, such as the AK-74M, are excellent infantry firearms. Ukraine's well-maintained and updated T-72 and T-64 tanks, designs now well over 50 years old, continue to hold their own against Russia's newer iterations, or at least what's left of them. When upgraded with modern electronics and munitions, Soviet-era weapons can more than hold their own in the 21st century. This was the case with the Soviet Kh-35 subsonic anti-ship missile that Ukraine overhauled into its R-360 Neptune and used it to sink this jewel of Russia's Black Sea fleet, the Moskva, back in April 2022. There are other examples of Soviet-era weapons being overhauled, upgraded, and flat-out MacGyvered into menacing new packages. Look no further than the trusty RPG-7, the famous Soviet shoulder-fired, muzzle-loaded rocket launcher that has seen service all over the world, for a prime example. RPGs were designed to penetrate tank armor, though their cheap, mass-produced warheads have been used against emplacements, buildings, helicopters, and human targets since the weapon's introduction in 1961. With plenty of cheap RPG rounds at their disposal, Ukraine has adapted certain warheads for more effective anti-personnel use. Video evidence from early in the conflict showed a fearless Ukrainian demolitions expert taking an angle grinder to a live 82mm mortar round, loosening the stabilizer fins with a couple of hatchet blows, and fitting an adapter manufactured by volunteers, all to fit the mortar onto an RPG booster. No mobile mortar system, no problem. All you have to do is strap a rocket booster to a mortar round, like this, and you get a man-portable anti-personnel munition that can be fired from a 15-pound tube. Ingenuity at its best. If this shoulder-fired RPG mortar hybrid didn't get the job done, why not just strap a bunch of anti-personnel grenades in a radial pattern around the anti-tank warhead itself? Well, that was exactly the line of thinking for some Ukrainian frontline units hoping to add a bit more juice to their anti-infantry RPG lineup. Images of makeshift explosives surfaced online revealing just that, an RPG warhead with a half-dozen grenades fastened to it, a Frankenstein creation tailor-made for omnidirectional destruction. If the humble RPG is any indication, there are classics in use that are still very functional. And then there are classic throwbacks that are real head-scratchers. With the 75th anniversary celebrations unfolding around the globe, many weapons that played starring roles in World War II have been making their greatest hits comeback in Ukraine. Here are some of the most notable sightings. The Mosin Nagant M1891-30 and its successor, the SVT-40. Back in the heady days of 1891, well over 100 years ago, Captain Sergei Mosin chambered a 7.62 by 54mm R cartridge into his finalized bolt-action assembly after a decade of experimentation and pulled the trigger of a firearm that would ultimately become one of the most mass-produced military bolt-action rifles in history. 37 million Mosin rifles were built over the next 8 decades, as the rifle saw service in 42 separate conflicts, a remarkable testament to its durability, reliability, and versatility. As you might have guessed, the Russo-Ukrainian War is the latest conflict to feature the time-worn Mosin. Updated in 1930, long and carbine versions of the M1891-30 model, the self-same workhorse that helped deliver the Allied victory in the East during World War II, has been seen in service today with Ukrainian and Russian forces alike. Dating back to 2014, Ukrainian separatists in the Donbass regularly utilized the Mosin in sniper roles. Some were doled out to Russian conscripts from deep Soviet stocks after Putin's military mobilization last year. Several of the Mosin's eventual successors, the semi-automatic SVT-40, SKS, and the infamous AK-47, have also been seen in use. But this is just the beginning. The water-cooled M1910 Maxim machine gun. One of the strangest sightings in Ukraine actually predates the antiquated Mosin, if you can believe that. Somewhere, someplace, American inventor Hiram Maxim must have been looking on with an amused smile on his face when the armed forces of Ukraine wheeled his revolutionary M1910 Maxim machine gun out of storage. Yes, that Maxim gun, the world's first reliable, effective, mass-produced machine gun, and started using them back in the mid-2010s against the Russians in the Donbass. The Maxim was invented in 1884 and remained in production until 1945, widely adopted around the globe by imperial powers hell-bent on killing each other in 2 world wars and a host of other conflicts. The Soviets adopted it in 1930, and as the Soviet surplus often did after the fall of the Berlin Wall, 35,000 Maxims found their way into Ukrainian storage. Many of them were dusted off, mounted onto vehicles, placed at checkpoints and fortifications, and used in other ways to repel the Russian invaders. Sporting protective armor plates and 2 heavy wheels to add mobility and stability, the Maxim uses the same 7.62 by 54mm ammunition as many other Soviet machine guns. Capable of firing 600 rounds a minute up to 3,000 meters away, the heavy Maxim is certainly not the best machine gun option on the battlefield, but this great war-killing machine is still showing its effectiveness 131 years later. Old Man Maxim would be proud. Other vestiges of the past have surfaced too. Back in 1947, the Soviet Union produced its last PPSH-41, a workhorse submachine gun used by the millions during World War II. With its recognizable drum magazine and high rate of fire, the open-bolt burp gun fired 7.62 by 25mm pistol rounds and saw use after World War II in Korea and Vietnam. Certain photos showed PPSH-41s and the PPS-43, its stamped steel brother, in the hands of certain Ukrainian DNR separatist fighters and internal police units in the war's first few months, perhaps more a sign of desperation than utility. It wasn't the only World War II-era machine gun to feature, though. The unmistakable DPM, DP-27 and 28, the mainstay Red Army light machine gun by 1945, have also been seen with their traditional pan, circular top-loaded machine gun chambered for the 7.62 by 54mm R cartridge. The DPM was eventually replaced by the more robust PK series of light machine guns that are seen around the world. But lead is lead, and clearly the dusty DPM can still hold its own from time to time. We're not sure how many of these are actually in use, but they are certainly there. Speaking of chunky, relatively unwieldy Soviet-designed firearms that refuse to die, Ukrainian soldiers have been seen firing 80-plus-year-old PTRS-41 and PTRD-41 anti-tank rifles from covert positions. These bulky metal rifles were designed from 1938 to 1939 and produced throughout World War II as a stopgap to help Soviet infantrymen stand a chance against German lightly armored vehicles. The gun was essentially an SKS on steroids. For such a relatively cheap weapon, the weapon's 14.5 by 114mm armor-piercing cartridges certainly did the job, penetrating armor plates up to 40mm thick from 100 meters away. Reportedly used off and on by militiamen in the Donbass firing World War II vintage ammunition since 2014, they are still seen on social media from time to time. There are a few honorable mentions on our list. Firearms spotted on the battlefield as old as the ones we've already spoken about, but whose actual use can't be confirmed. These include several Nazi weapons including the MP-40 and STG-44 submachine gun, as well as the MG-42, the lead-spitting beast whose modern variant, the MG-3, remains in use in more than 40 countries. Ironically, while certain Ukrainian units used a Nazi-designed machine gun to repel Russian soldiers, early photos from the war showed American-built Lend-Lease Thompson submachine guns taken from captured Russian prisoners. It's impossible to know if this was a one-off sighting, but its presence makes odd sense, considering the United States shipped millions of Tommy guns to the Soviets, then fighting the Nazis back during World War II. Adding more American flavor to the hodgepodge of vintage firearms in Ukraine, if Russian state media is to be believed, the Ukrainians have been using US-made M101 towed howitzers firing 105mm shells on front lines near Zaporizhzhia, an artillery piece fielded by the US Army during World War II. These M101s were allegedly donated by Lithuania back in September 2022. What about imported flavors? 32 nations from tiny North Macedonia to Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, and Sweden have all pledged varying amounts of military aid to Ukraine since the start of the war. Some countries, like the United States, can offer tens of billions of dollars worth of expensive vehicles, drones, munitions, and equipment. Others, like Portugal, donate grenades, small arms ammunition, some automatic rifles, and firefighting helicopters. That Ukraine has taken this jumbled admixture of arms and equipment and made it work speaks to their pluck and resourcefulness, traits the Western world has come to admire. In this deluge of aid, a long list of modern small arms have flowed into the country. Ukraine is unique in the annals of military history in that respect, an independent country whose rapidly revitalized military operates with such a vast range of amalgamated systems and platforms. Across the front lines, soldiers are now fighting with M4 carbines, M240s, M32 grenade launchers, and M2 Brownings, alongside smaller numbers of submachine guns donated by private American companies. Desert Tech sent its Bullpup SRS-A1 anti-material rifle, an insanely accurate rifle that fires the powerful .338 Lapua Magnum round, while Keltec sent 400 sub-2009mm machine guns to make up for a civilian contract they'd lost track of. There's even been a sighting of a suppressed American Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle. To this list, the Ukrainians employ many foreign imports. Czech firearms like the CZ-805 Bren and the ZVI Falcon Op-99 anti-material rifle, British Starstreak laser-guided high-velocity air defense systems, futuristic-looking Belgian FN-2000s, German MP5s, and licensed versions of Israeli small arms like the Tavor and Negev manufactured by Fort, a Ukrainian firm based out of Vinnytsia. We've also seen next-generation variants of time-tested designs surface, like the bullpup ASH 12.7 and the Russian-made assault rifle or the AK-12, a fifth-generation Kalashnikov assault rifle introduced in just 2018. Unlike the AK-74, the AK-12 is chambered in the 5.45 by 39mm round, with the Russian variant capable of firing the 7.62, known as the AK-15. With its free-floating barrel, cheaper cost per unit, and stronger construction, the AK-12 features improved accuracy and resilience. Okay, let's get to the juicy stuff. The ripest field for weird weapons during the Ukraine war hasn't really been in a field at all. It's been in the air, where unmanned drones and cruise missiles rule the skies and deliver pinpoint destruction at the push of a joystick. Recently, a Russian Blackjack strategic bomber fired a Kh-55 cruise missile stripped of its nuclear warhead at Ukraine. Yes, you heard that right. They fired a nuclear-capable cruise missile, albeit an older one designed in the 1980s, with weighted ballast in place of its nuclear warhead. But why? The Kh-55 cruise missile was first designed in the mid-1970s. Fired from the belly of a Tupolev Tu-160 Blackjack supersonic bomber, the turbofan 200-kiloton yield cruise missiles were the spear of Russia's nuclear deterrent for decades. It may seem strange, but firing an inert nuclear cruise missile makes some sense. Increasingly, as Ukrainian air defenses improve, Russia has seen less success bombarding civilian infrastructure. Cruise missiles are expensive, and Russia seems to be running out. Using older air-launched Kh-55 missiles plucked out of storage might be Russia's way of trying to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses without wasting money on expensive missiles that get intercepted or miss their mark. Russia has tried to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses in other ways too. Back in March 2022, Ukraine released photos of a partially destroyed mystery munition, resembling a dart released from an Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile. The strange devices were each a foot long, painted with an orange tail, and contained a heat source but no explosive warhead. The findings were puzzling. Experts believe the darts to be bomblets on part of some sort of cluster munition package. Later, they revised their thesis, arguing these dart-like munitions were some sort of penetration aid, a Cold War-era device used as a countermeasure to help primary ballistic missiles reach their target. The darts worked as decoys, like the Kh-55 cruise missile mentioned earlier. Loaded up with electronic jammers and heat sources, they can attract missiles, fool radars, and foil infrared seekers. Jeffrey Lewis, professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California, claimed it was a very curious decision by the Russians to use decoy missiles, considering that at that stage Ukraine still lacked the military capabilities to successfully shoot down Iskander missiles. These penetration aids were highly classified for decades, making their subsequent discovery an intelligence bonanza for the West. Another mysterious impact crater, this one far from Ukraine in the Croatian capital of Zagreb, made the world wonder what on earth the Russian military was up to 1 month into its invasion. On March 10, 2022, an unmanned aerial vehicle overflew Romanian, Hungarian, and Croatian airspace, flying 430 miles per hour at 4,300 feet before careering into a Croatian school campus and crashing into soft ground. The local residents were fortunate. The drone landed just 160 feet from a highly populated student dormitory. Incredibly, nobody was hurt. Initial theories claimed it had been a Ukrainian army recon drone. Inspections of the surviving wreckage painted a different picture. The presence of Cyrillic markings and a Soviet Red Star insignia prompted an American analyst to identify the aircraft as a Russian Tupolev Tu-141 drone, an unmanned aircraft used since the 1970s. Subsequent investigations revealed that the drone was indeed carrying a warhead. Nobody ever found out whether it had been a Russian drone or was in fact an off-course Ukrainian drone that ran out of fuel. Either way, the crash sparked an international incident, with residents and politicians from several NATO countries wondering how such a drone could so effortlessly penetrate their airspace. But the drone story doesn't end there. Russia has employed plenty of drones to observe and attack Ukrainian civilian and military targets. One of the most unique iterations has been the BIZZARE KUB-BLA kamikaze drone, a short-range loitering munition manufactured by a subsidiary of the Kalashnikov company. The KUB-BLA, measured with a wingspan of 1.2 meters, can carry a 3-kilogram payload and travel 130 kilometers per hour. It has a maximum range of 40 kilometers and a flight time of 30 minutes, so it can't be employed far beyond Russian positions, but it can make use of AI technologies on approach, making adjustments and identifying its static target. Several KUB-BLA drones were intercepted over Kyiv in the early days of the invasion, sparking theories that they were being used to target Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and decapitate the Ukrainian government. Some of the most interesting drone footage captured during the war, however, doesn't come from military drones at all. It comes from the cheap, commercially produced drones that the Ukrainians have jerry-rigged for all manner of missions. Using 3D printers, a soldering iron, cheap hardware, and some plain old-fashioned ingenuity, Ukraine's army of commercial drones have now been retrofitted for offensive service, and to great effect. It took lots of experimentation and refinement to engineer a light enough grenade to knock out enemy armor using nothing but altitude and gravity. Very quickly, Ukrainians succeeded in engineering lightweight munitions that did not affect a drone's flight path whatsoever. A real engineering masterclass. War is economy. It's money. One Ukrainian soldier commented on the rationale for making everyday drones more lethal. If you have a drone for $3,000 and a grenade for $200, and you destroy a tank that costs $3 million, that's very interesting. Interesting indeed. Makeshift air-delivered care packages have gone on to achieve global renown, both the deadly and the benign. Viral videos show deft Ukrainian drone operators conducting the wartime equivalent of a basketball trick shot, landing grenades in open tank hatches, underground air pipes, narrow trenches, and populated foxholes from hundreds of feet in the air. In other settings, drone modifications have been shown being used to transport small packages of sugar to frontline soldiers, and even most recently, to steal an enemy radio set from a dead Russian soldier that was subsequently used to listen in on enemy plans for several days. The Ukrainians have thanked their Russian enemy for their default Lend-Lease program. Abandoned and salvaged equipment, most of it virtually interchangeable with what they already carry into battle, provides an ongoing boon to Ukrainian military effectiveness. But not all strange and unique weapons are captured intact. While the Ukrainians will make use of the captured firearms and other weapons for a long time to come, vehicle debris recovered after a skirmish almost a year ago revealed a destroyed Russian prototype tank many believed to be one of a kind. Video footage from a March 17, 2022 clash showed the burnt-out remains of a completely unique tank, a T-80 UM2 Black Eagle. This particular Black Eagle was in bad shape. Like so many before and after it, its autoloader had taken a direct hit, which promptly exploded and blew its turret clean off. It was an interesting find. The T-80 UM2 was once part of a next-generation tank development project, codenamed Object 640, or Black Eagle. The first iteration of the main battle tank appeared in 1997. At the time, Russia touted the experimental, modified T-80U as something that would easily hold its own against Western main battle tanks like the M1A2 Abrams. It boasted Cactus Explosive Reactive Armor (ERA) panels on its front hull and track skirts, a welded steel turret, anti-fragmentation screens around the main gun, and eventually, DROSD-2 Active Protection System, a radar-operated anti-rocket and missile fragmentation defense net that can disable incoming munitions 20 to 30 feet from the tank. Unfortunately and predictably for Russia, the project never got off the ground. The T-80 UM2 never entered production, and the prototype became a trial platform for new systems until, in early 2022, it was lumped into a Russian military column, ambushed north of Kyiv, and utterly destroyed. Perhaps Russia was keen to test out its capabilities on the modern battlefield. At any rate, one of the only tanks deployed to Russia so far to feature an anti-protection system didn't fare well. Remember that saying, desperate times call for desperate measures? Having now lost over 1,600 confirmed tanks in battle, 536 of them captured outright by Ukraine, Russia's real strategy has been to scrape the bottom of the barrel for dilapidated and poorly maintained Soviet-era surplus in its stocks, hastily modernize them and ship them off into the meat grinder for use by ill-trained conscripts and mercenaries. Recent images on social media, for example, show several BRDM-2MS 4x4 armored reconnaissance vehicles being overhauled at Russia's 103rd Armored Repair Plant near Chita in Siberia. However, the BRDM-2MS isn't much to write home about. It's an updated version of the BRDM-2, a Soviet amphibious lightly armored vehicle introduced into service back in 1966. Fitted with a coaxial 7.62 machine gun and a one-man turret with a 14.5mm KP-VT machine gun, mechanics were shown outfitting the paint-chipped vehicle with new thermal sights and, hopefully, a new coat of paint. Which again begs the question, why? Given the rate of vehicular destruction in Ukraine, operating the four-man BRDM-2MS will be like riding a tin box into battle against the likes of the modern AT-4, Javelin, or NLAW. Yes, it's nice to have wheels when you're an infantryman, But all the time and energy spent modernizing, or perhaps more accurately, restoring a vehicle that will barely stand up to Ukrainian artillery, mines, and tanks, much less the far cheaper Western anti-tank missiles commonly employed across the front, just seems counterproductive, like Putin's entire war. Yes, it may just be for show. Perhaps it may even excel in a behind-the-lines transport role. Nobody knows just how many BRDMs will see combat. But if they are deployed to the front, one Twitter user observed that Russia's upgrades are tantamount to having an 82 Honda and slapping a backup camera to it. They certainly won't protect their occupants. We do know that the same repair plant has modernized oodles of Cold War antique T-62s of all types, the same ones seen on railway cars headed to the front at various stages of the war thus far. Most of these museums on tracks, culled from deep storage, have not seen combat in decades, if at all, and their maintenance records reflect that fact. Most are being fitted with new engines, thermal imaging, bulkier armor, new comms, and better optics. The mere presence of the T-62 in Ukraine, 20,000 of which were being mass-produced during the Cold War from 1961 to 1973, shows how depleted Putin's starting lineup of T-80 and T-72 tanks has become. Attrition has forced him deep into his reserves. The number of T-72s in storage are reported to be far lower than anticipated, many of them mothballed and unsalvageable. T-62s are often used by reserve units in the east and thus kept in better condition. But if they get deployed to the front, no amount of cope cages welded onto the T-62 chassis will be able to protect these relics from destruction. Think of what would happen if all of a sudden the United States Armed Forces started wheeling M60s out of storage and slapping modern equipment onto them. Sure, it could do something, the same way a T-62 can. If deployed to fortify an occupied town or doled out as a training implement, it could provide some utility. But as David Axe, a Forbes defense writer, said it, there's no evidence the T-62s played any meaningful role in the fighting. There's ample evidence their four-man crews abandoned the tanks at first opportunity. The Cheetah plant has allegedly been tasked with refurbishing 800 T-62s by 2025. As you may have noticed, this list of the strangest, weirdest weapons in Ukraine isn't exactly short, and it's hardly exhaustive. Ukrainian soldiers have reportedly captured one Russian prisoner armed with a Chinese-made single-shot pellet rifle. There is also that iconic image of a Russian Rosgvardia member guarding a checkpoint in Kherson with an antique 12-pound Napoleonic-era cannon. It could all be a joke, a stunt for social media, or a decoy to fool the Ukrainians. Either way, it's surreal that so many historic and head-scratching pieces have made their way onto the battlefields of Ukraine. Trying to defend yourself in a war against Russia is no joke. In its efforts to defend itself against Putin's aggressive invasion, Ukraine has needed all the help it can get. Here's how a shipment of US Vietnam War weapons could help Ukraine turn the tide against Russia's military. After Russia invaded its smaller neighbor in February, the United States offered to evacuate Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky from the capital. But in a now famous statement of his resolve, Zelensky responded that the fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride. And soon Western countries were happy to grant his wish. In the months since the war began, the US, NATO, and others have supplied Ukraine with an enormous amount of military aid. In fact, the United States alone has contributed over $18.6 billion since February. This has mostly taken the form of lethal modern weaponry, including the high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, Javelin anti-tank missiles, self-destructing Phoenix Ghost drones, and many others. Weapons like these stopped the invasion in its tracks and have helped Ukraine successfully fight back Russian troops all year. As the war transitioned from urban combat to a devastating artillery slugfest in the east of the country, obtaining new firepower has become a major factor in success or defeat. Accordingly, in the past few months, Western assistance to Ukraine has stepped up again. It has started to allow Ukrainian troops to achieve artillery superiority over Russia, driving them out of major cities like Kherson. Ukraine is now firing as many artillery shells as Russia, while satellite-guided targeting is making their strikes longer range and more precise. But modern weaponry isn't the only technology making an appearance on the battlefield. Recently, the US has once again expanded its security assistance to Ukraine. In addition to contemporary weapons, they have made plans to supply Ukraine with upgraded armaments from the era of the Vietnam War. Other NATO countries are expected to follow suit, potentially supplying Ukrainians with a major new source of firepower. While many consider them more fit for a museum, these older weapon systems could still be lethal. They could even help Ukraine counter some of Russia's biggest new threats.
But what exactly are these weapons, and how much of an edge will they give Ukraine in the coming months? The main piece of Vietnam-era military hardware currently being delivered to Ukraine are MIM-23 Hawk missile systems. Developed by Raytheon from 1952 onwards, Hawk stands for Homing All the Way Killer, a nod to the missile's guided targeting. A medium to long-range surface-to-air missile, the Hawk was first put into service in 1959. In those days, the US was increasing its involvement in Vietnam, where the Hawk was used extensively. Designed as a more mobile counterpart to the even older MIM-14 Nike Hercules missile, the Hawk emphasized portability over range and altitude. Full of complex components, the original system was also notoriously unreliable and prone to breakdowns. It had a kill-shot probability of just over 50% and an average time of only 43 hours between repairs. Because of this, the US military spent decades updating the Hawk missiles, partially through the addition of a semi-active radar homing guidance system. This radar upgrade vastly improved the Hawk's accuracy, and the new model, known as the Improved Hawk or iHawk, entered service in 1971. Over the next 20 years, the iHawk continued to be upgraded with the addition of electronic jamming measures and new warheads for use against short-range targets. These chances increased the iHawk's kill-shot percentage to over 85%, making it into a potent weapon. The models being sent to Ukraine are slightly older, but can intercept aerial targets 45 to 50 kilometers, 28 to 31 miles away, at an altitude of 65,000 feet, 20,000 meters. Using solid fuel propellant, the Hawks can reach a maximum speed of Mach 2.4. Each missile is roughly 1,300 pounds, 600 kilograms, and 17 feet, 5.2 meters, in length, with a 119-pound fragmentation warhead that can deal some serious damage. Hawk missiles are definitely outdated. They were retired by the US Marine Corps in 2002 and replaced by the more powerful Patriot system even earlier. The US has so far refused to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine, since doing so would require US soldiers on the ground to operate. Even so, Hawks are a serious upgrade to the Stinger missiles Ukraine has been given so far. While Stingers can be carried by a single soldier, they have far less range and destructive power. In contrast, Hawk missiles are better known for shooting down higher-altitude Russian fighter jets. They can also more effectively counter the Iranian-made Shahed kamikaze drones, which Russia has been using to wreak havoc on Ukraine's cities. The main advantage of the Shahed drones is that they are cheap and numerous. Russia has reportedly ordered over 2,400 of them from Iran. The drones are fired in groups, so even if most are shot down, a few can usually get through to dive bomb their unlucky target. Considering Ukraine only has so many surface-to-air missiles, there is a high chance that this keeps happening. And since each Shahed drone costs only $20,000, it's a waste to destroy them with powerful air defenses like the long-range NASAMS missiles, which can cost over $1.2 million per shot. But Hawk missiles could be the perfect solution for countering the threat from kamikaze drones. While not nearly as cheap as Shahed drones, their age does make them inexpensive for missiles, at roughly $250,000 each. And while the US hasn't disclosed how many Hawk missiles it currently has or is sending to Ukraine, there are probably a lot of them. At the peak of their production in the 1980s, the US had over 27,000 Hawk missiles in its inventory. While most of these are less advanced than the later models, they could provide a real boost to Ukrainian firepower. There's just one hitch in this plan: the Hawk launchers. The missiles are transported and fired from rolling M192 launchers, which can be wheeled along the ground with 3 Hawk missiles mounted on the back. The issue? The US might not have any in working condition. Because of their extended time in storage, an American official told Reuters that the country's Hawk launchers are in disrepair. However, one partial solution to this has come from an unlikely source: Spain. The European country announced that it would send 4 of its own Hawk launchers to the Ukraine, to be paired with the refurbished US missiles. Ukraine may also create some homemade solutions, as they've successfully adapted lots of other old-school military technology. The first Hawk missiles will likely be on their way to Ukraine soon, especially since they are being sent through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, or PDA. The PDA is a legal tool allowing the US president to transfer military equipment from storage without congressional approval in emergencies. The Biden administration has already issued the PDA extensively to support Ukraine. Since August 2021, it has ordered 11 drawdowns of military equipment into the country. Congress has been on board as well, increasing the cap of the drawdowns from $100 million to nearly $11 billion for this year. Hawk missiles are just the latest part of this, and despite their age, they could prove to be a valuable piece of military assistance. Ukraine will certainly need all the weaponry it can get hold of, as the conflict doesn't look likely to stop anytime soon, and as it drags on, odd weapons deals like this one could become much more common. Why? mainly because the war has shaken up the global arms industry, creating sometimes surprising results like the Hawk missiles being sent to Ukraine. It's dramatically increased the demand for weapons by both Russia and Ukraine, but also by surrounding countries worried about more Russian aggression. In another recent example of this, Poland has signed a $5.8 billion defense contract with South Korea, far from one of its usual suppliers of weaponry. The deal includes hundreds of artillery rocket launchers, along with tanks and howitzers that Poland hopes will beef up its deterrence against Russia. And South Korea is just one of a number of countries whose weapons are now in high demand. Iran's choice to begin supplying Russia with drones is also a sign of this, as is Turkey's recent decision to sell similar weapons to Ukraine. Month by month, more countries seem to be getting sucked into the conflict, and since Russia accounts for nearly 20% of the global arms trade, its recent battlefield failures could also cause a steep decline in demand for their products. As this happens, China may also begin to take Russia's place as a major weapons supplier. Many other countries, from India to Bulgaria, are already working to create self-sufficient defense industries in another sign of geopolitical change. Just like the Hawk missiles heading to Ukraine, these unusual decisions are all a product of the massive disruptions caused by 9 months of war in Europe. And as weapons continue to flood into the country, more unexpected changes will probably keep coming.
Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs for short, more commonly known as drones, have become the staple of modern warfare ever since their iconic use in the war in Afghanistan in the early 2000s by the US. 2 decades later, drones have nearly unmatched military capabilities, and it's showing in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Instead of traditional infantry and vehicular combat, Russian and Ukrainian forces are locked in a stalemate of relentless drone warfare. Both sides are trying to minimize their own casualties by deploying drones en masse to launch grenades and bombs and perform kamikaze strikes against the enemy. Some more recent developments are even using AI to locate and lock onto targets, perhaps removing a human soldier entirely from the equation of war. But how did we get to this point? Where did drones originate, and why do they have such terrifying combat capabilities? To answer these questions, let's take a crash course in the history of aerial warfare. The potential of aerial vehicles in warfare began even before World War I, within a decade after the invention of the aircraft by the Wright brothers. European militaries realized that an airplane could provide vital reconnaissance and tactical support from above. An airplane's ability to go behind enemy lines in the air and report on enemy positions while staying relatively safe from ground-based fire was considered the primary benefit of developing flying vehicles. But there are some setbacks too. Early airplanes were relatively bulky, slow, and fragile man-operated vehicles, discounting them as a potential offensive weapon before World War I started. But that didn't mean that aircraft couldn't carry weapons at all. The first armed airplanes had fixed machine guns and would be used in early forms of dogfighting. From there, the development of more reliable weapons and sturdier aircraft led to the development of fighter jets. But it was the second use of airplanes that spawned the concept of early drone warfare. Instead of munitions-based weapons, aircraft could carry bombs or other incendiary devices to drop on the enemy. This concept eventually evolved into bomber aircraft, forming one branch with larger and more defensive aircraft designed that could carry dozens of high-impact bombs and missiles to terrorize the enemy. The second branch led to an aircraft that was stripped of most of its survivability, focusing on maneuverability. In effect, the first military drones aimed to be flying bombs that would deliver a deadly payload to the target. The first such developments began as early as 1917, before World War I ended, and included the British aerial target and the US Kettering bug. The Kettering bug was capable of carrying roughly 160 pounds of explosives for 75 miles and was propelled by pneumatic and electronic systems that used a gyroscope to stabilize and guide the craft. Ultimately, the first attempts at making drones into aerial combat staples were only partially successful. The flying bombs never entered service as they were deemed too unreliable to be flown over Allied troops on their way to the target. The research into developing similar weapons continued throughout the 20th century, but drones would not make an entry onto the battlefield until the Vietnam War, although they were revamped to be used mainly for intelligence gathering and recon. It would take a turn of the century to leapfrog the development of the drone into the combat force that it's known as today. The first such drones were used in Afghanistan, partly because the local insurgents didn't have the anti-air capabilities to detect and take down small and fast aircraft. The US would deploy purpose-built combat drones like the Predator, which could fly for up to 40 hours at a time and perform both reconnaissance and attack missions. The combat drones at the time were more similar to miniature aircraft, capable of holding an anti-tank bomb that could be launched at will, all the while being guided by a pilot who could be thousands of miles away, getting near-instant feedback on the drone's position, heading, and status. However, one of the significant downsides of developing these combat-ready drones was their prohibitive cost. An evolution of the Predator called the Reaper would end up costing around $32 million each. It led to memes showing the million-dollar gear being used on suicide missions to bomb rural neighborhoods in the Middle East. The US drones would be part of why America was able to maintain military supremacy over practically the whole world, but it would be another type of drone that drastically changed how the current wars are being fought. While the military was concerned with being able to create more maneuverable and effective drones, the recreational drone sector boomed over the past 2 decades. Drones became near common household items as toys and imaging devices that could take pictures from the air, while also having enormous commercial potential as marketing devices and even delivery vehicles. Those advances led to billions of dollars in market value, which allowed commercial drone manufacturers to develop drones that could fly for longer periods of time, carry larger payloads, and implement better navigational technologies. You could now buy a remote-controlled UAV outfitted with live-stream video feed outputs that could fly for hours for as little as a few $100s, with higher quality devices costing a few $1,000s per unit. The DJI technology company of China would end up dominating the industry of personal and commercial drones, representing 70% of all small drones in use across the world. But militaries around the world would soon realize that commercial drones could have a significant combat potential. For example, DJI's agricultural drone can carry around 250 pounds, which is more than enough power to airlift a person and carry them out of a war zone. However, the real terror of the skies, the much smaller DJI Mavic Pro and similar drones, which could be found in retail for about $2,000. The drone has been widely used by both Russian and Ukrainian forces in the ongoing conflict. Its typical use is for reconnaissance, gathering vital information about enemy positions, and tracking vital equipment as it moves across the battlefield. But militaries have quickly adapted the little drone into a big menace. By outfitting it with a larger battery, the drone can stay aloft for a much longer time. This gave the drone an effective range of around 30 miles, allowing it to penetrate deeper into enemy lines and spy on the enemy formations. Of course, the drone doesn't come with a built-in weapon system to threaten the enemy directly, and the army would still need to exert effort to launch an attack based on the intel. But they can be pretty much everywhere the army needs them to be, a small battalion of flying machines that can be deployed at will and patrol an area for a few hours. This comes in handy when you factor in the second augmentation for the DJI Mavic, the ability to carry a bomb. A remote-controlled gripping mechanism could carry and deploy a bomb directly onto, or in some cases inside, an enemy tank, immobilizing or even obliterating a piece of machinery that costs exponentially more to produce and requires a human driver. This means that a single $2,000 drone with some modifications and an expert operator could incur significant casualties to the enemy. All the while, the operator can be tucked safely away in a remote location. Of course, these small drones are not particularly survivable. They have to fly at relatively low altitudes, are not particularly fast, and only have one meaningful way to inflict damage to the enemy: dropping the bomb payload. In some cases, the drone has to physically go with the bomb if it's trying to maneuver onto trucks or behind cover, and as the bomb detonates, it destroys the drone with it. This has resulted in a third modification to the drone, where an RPG warhead is taped to the drone with no way to dismantle it. The drone has a singular goal: to fly into an enemy tank or defensive position and deal as much damage as possible. The Ukrainian army has reported losing 10,000 drones a month, with enemy fire or kamikaze attacks slowly draining their inventory. On the flip side, losing a drone is a relatively minor inconvenience and much less costly than losing a human soldier. This form of replaceable warfare means that neither side is willing to take many risks when drones are patrolling the sky above and can deliver bombs with deadly precision. Both the Ukrainian and Russian armies have used these types of bomb-carrying drones to great effect. Since a single bomb can already devastate a tank, its effect on humans is obviously much greater. Pair that with the ability to appear above enemy positions out of thin air, and this has given the drones a significant psychological effect on the enemy. You've probably seen videos of Russian soldiers running away or surrendering to drones. This means that drones don't even have to deploy their explosive payload to be effective in prolonged, attrition-based combat, further improving their usefulness and efficiency. Of course, it's not only the recreational drones that are being used in drone warfare. Both sides of the Russo-Ukrainian war are developing larger and more powerful drones, as well as receiving different models from their benefactors. One of Ukraine's developments is the Vampire heavy attack drone, produced within the country. This drone is much larger and heavier than the Mavic, with enough carrying capacity to use a mine as its payload. By modifying an anti-tank mine, the Ukrainian army can use the Vampire to drop the makeshift bomb from above. Thanks to the Vampire's large size, it can fly higher than the Mavic and potentially have a longer range when paired with a sufficiently powerful battery. The drone's effectiveness has been noted by the Russian military, where soldiers have taken to calling them the Baba Yaga, a flying witch from Slavic mythology and folklore. On the flip side, the Vampires are much more expensive and less numerous than the Mavics, making them less expendable. If a Vampire is taken down, the Ukrainian army feels pressured to get closer to the front lines to retrieve the drone and repair it for future use. Essentially, soldiers' lives are risked to save a small machine and make it reusable for combat. This is a startling contrast as to how valuable machinery can be compared to human life. This has perhaps been taken to the extreme with the importance of qualified and experienced drone pilots. Both the Ukrainian and Russian armies heavily depend on skilled drone pilots to maneuver these small machines into the perfect position to inflict devastating damage. These pilots have, in turn, become one of the primary targets in the ongoing wars, with entire military strategies developed to take out drone pilot schools or particularly experienced pilots whose positions are known to the enemy. A drone unit being deployed to a position can have a devastating effect on enemy morale. Since the war has somewhat stagnated into trench warfare, drones have the capability to neutralize these defenses. They can fly over trenches and survey which ones are being currently used, then relay this information back. This can create a state of perpetual danger, where a bomb-carrying drone could appear at any given time and destroy an ill-positioned piece of equipment, vehicle, or soldiers. Imagine a trench that is being attacked by the enemy, with soldiers inside who need to be evacuated to prevent further loss of life. If a medical rescue unit attempts to help them in broad daylight, they might quickly find themselves surrounded by drones, with their positions being marked clearly on enemy tactical maps. And if any one of those particular drones carries a bomb, it could spell doom for the entire operation. Even smaller drones can exert this level of battlefield control and disruption. It's a reality that has forced operations into being rescheduled to nighttime when the visibility is lower, even for IR camera drones, or even completely abandoning rescue and assistance missions for low-priority targets. One of the key reasons drones have had so much success in modern wars is partly because they were not meant to be a war device. Modern anti-air systems were designed to detect, locate, and destroy fast-moving, high-altitude targets that give off significant heat signatures, such as jet engines aboard aircraft or missiles. Drones, on the other hand, have rather small frames and practically negligible heat output. They also fly relatively close to the ground, often weaving between buildings and trees. This makes them practically invisible to long-range anti-air systems and much more difficult to shoot down by conventional anti-air defenses. Of course, they're still vulnerable to traditional fire from rifles, but this would mean that soldiers would have to give away their position and become prime targets for additional drone attacks. Currently, the Ukrainian army is using nets to prevent drones from getting close to vital buildings or into defensive postings. This means that the armies have relatively little in the way of counter-drone threats other than pressuring drone pilots with their own drone squadrons or using other squads to make targeted attacks. Eventually, this could force the army to channel too many resources into countering drones and not enough into creating a defensive force to repel traditional attacks such as tanks or artillery. Drones currently have few effective counter-tactics. Small arms and anti-air rockets are typically the last line of defense against these machines, so the first defensive measure both Ukraine and Russia use is electronic interference, signal jammers which prevent the drone pilot from effectively using the drone. In some cases, the drone might become completely inert and fall from the sky entirely. Currently, Russia and Ukraine are testing each other's drone jamming capabilities relentlessly, and Russia has an advantage. The Russian military command has created a centralized drone warfare strategy, allowing Russian jamming devices and drone squads to operate relatively independently. In addition, Russia's drone operators pilot their devices relatively far from the front and out of range of jamming signals, preventing the two systems from overlapping and possibly interfering with one another. There's not really an analog to that kind of tactic on Ukraine's side. Ukraine's military doesn't have this sort of unified approach, and drones can, on occasion, receive signals intended for a completely different drone, with the pilot losing contact with their own. The result? Imminent mission failure and loss of the device. Additionally, many of Ukraine's systems are not modified before they're deployed into combat. Because they're using commercial drones such as the Mavic, most drones will operate on the same signal frequency as the ones that can be bought from the store. These signals are more susceptible to being jammed, and Russia's jamming systems are relentless. According to a report by the New York Times, the Ukrainian army considers the lack of system enhancement in drone squadrons to be the second biggest issue, right after Russia's jamming technology. Without soldiers proficient in coding and cryptography, Russia can overwhelm the Ukrainian drones through technological superiority. That doesn't mean that Ukraine isn't developing high-end systems of its own. The Mavics and the Vampires may be the newest generation small drones, but the army is unleashing their larger brother. The Raybird 3 is a state-of-the-art combat drone developed by the Ukrainian company APC Skyton and first put into service in 2016, with upgrades in 2020 to make it even more powerful. According to Skyton's information, the Raybird 3 can stay aloft between 18 and 28 hours, and some claim the operating time can be extended to over 30 hours. This far outstrips the capabilities of a recreational drone, currently used as a pawn on the front. Furthermore, the drone's operational distance is over 1,500 miles, with a top speed of around 120 miles per hour. It's primarily designed as a long-range UAV for reconnaissance and targeting. The chassis can withstand temperatures between -30 centigrade to +50, making it durable in all kinds of weather and hostile terrain. According to Skyton, this drone could feasibly fly from Kyiv to Munich, report on what a person is looking at on their phone, and then fly back to Kyiv to complete the mission. If true, this would mean that Ukrainian drones could easily reach far into the Russian mainland. One of the key capabilities of the Raybird 3 that makes it practically invaluable in modern warfare is its ability to be deployed and launched semi-autonomously. The staging system, a crossbow-like design, can be assembled and launch the drone within 20 minutes of arriving at a location, and then be disassembled in only 2 minutes. This is a vital characteristic to ensure the survival of both the drone and the pilot. Since the Russians are constantly monitoring nearby airspace for new drones, a Raybird flying into the sky might suggest to them that its pilot, or at least the launch system, is relatively nearby and could be targeted by Russia's own drones. By minimizing how long the launch system is visible from the air, the Ukrainian army can mitigate the need to deploy the drone closer to enemy territory, thus ensuring that the drone can reach its intended target faster or stay in the air for longer. Furthermore, the Raybird has built-in systems that shield it from electronic interference and make it more resilient to signal jamming. It can operate semi-automatically. If the operator picks a target or a location, the drone could feasibly fly to it without manual path corrections, relying entirely on the internal navigation systems to reach the target unscathed. With a combination of a light fiberglass frame and aerodynamic fuselage, alongside strong anti-jamming systems, the makers of the Raybird claim that the drone is nearly invisible to Russian anti-aircraft radars, further enhancing the drone's survivability while in the air. Need proof? A Russian social media website recently showed a photo of a felled Raybird near the Krasnodar region, around 130 miles behind the front lines. This demonstrates that the drone can feasibly operate much deeper in Russian territory than other models, giving Ukraine a fighting chance against Russia's overwhelming drone resources. But one of the biggest setbacks of the Raybird is its cost. While the Mavic costs only $2,000 to purchase and not much more to modify to be reliable for close-range drone warfare, a single Raybird 3 is estimated to cost $250,000. This means that the Ukrainian army and the Raybird manufacturer are hard-pressed to obtain more funding for this type of device, considering that the Ukrainian army is already lacking equipment and finances in many other areas. On the other side of the front, the Russian military is not experiencing such financial setbacks. The state-industrial complex is more than capable of refilling its drone supplies on a massive scale. Furthermore, Russians are currently using many more devices made by DJI, the same Chinese manufacturer behind the Mavic, including the Aeroscope drone detector. This means that Russia's drone warfare is effectively backed by an independent company working with Russia's biggest ally and trade partner during the war. It could also mean that Russia might eventually get access to enough technologically advanced detection and anti-drone systems from DJI to counter the threat posed by the Raybird and other drones in Ukrainian possession. Simultaneously, the Aeroscope system is no longer in production, according to DJI's website, which could mean that the system is not capable of detecting Raybirds effectively. The addition of newer, more battle-ready drones even has the potential to completely push out humans from most avenues of modern warfare. Long-range artillery and missile capabilities have already been made as automated as possible. Contemporary missiles such as the Storm Shadow use 3 different navigational systems to autocorrect their flight path and lock onto the target. And the Storm Shadow is not an entirely new design, considering it was developed in the late 90s and the UK and France have already started creating a more modern upgrade. While modified recreational drones such as the Mavics are one step towards that, they require a human pilot, and a skilled one at that. However, the advancement of AI development is threatening even that area of expertise. AI-guided systems, similar to those found on modern missiles and launchers, could feasibly allow a drone to automatically patrol an area and lock onto its target without human assistance. The scenarios from sci-fi movies would finally come true, where drones would outnumber, outgun, and outmatch humans in close-range warfare. The rapid rate of AI advancement poses a few problems for countries that currently rely on drones to carry out attacks. First, the AI systems in drones and other military deployments pose more of a threat to civilians. If the targeting system is left entirely to the AI to make decisions on what and who to target, a drone could feasibly go on a rampage in an inhabited area. Without proper acknowledgement of how AI targeting works, military leaders could pin these deaths on the machine and classify these human losses as collateral damage. It would be difficult to take a commander operating a drone squadron to trial for war crimes if they were never in control of the machines in the first place, and the AI algorithm simply decided who to target based on predetermined and possibly vague parameters. To counter this development, the Red Cross and other human rights groups have proposed several legally binding declarations that the use of force must be human-controlled to preserve accountability. While these are yet to be enforced, even they contain shortcomings. Thus, legal experts argue about the ramifications of letting AI control any part of an automated weapon system. For example, what may be currently legal to implement in an AI system might not be moral, and vice versa. By investing heavily in drone warfare, and particularly in AI to guide the drones, the world's major military powers could be opening a veritable Pandora's box. Drones could fly completely independently of their human operators, and eventually, wars might be fought solely as AI against AI. The consequences of that could be catastrophic. In the end, humans may not need to apply for military service if there's no need for them. But what do you think? Are drones the ultimate military force that would make human soldiers effectively obsolete? How is Ukraine adapting to the new realities on the battlefield as the war enters its third year? One of the more important but understated ways is through the use of high-quality decoys to waste Russian drones and ammunition. But what exactly does this approach entail, and is it actually working? Let's dive in. When 2023 began, Western expectations for Ukraine were reaching a crescendo. Successful counteroffensives in Kherson and Kharkiv oblasts in the summer and fall of 2022 had revealed serious weaknesses in the Russian military. As Russia looked like it was exhausting itself trying to capture the minor city of Bakhmut, there were high hopes for a new offensive that would cut the invaders' land bridge to Crimea and deal a heavy military blow to the Russian war machine, while imperiling Vladimir Putin's political position at home. Unfortunately for Ukrainians, none of these hopes materialized. The offensive in Zaporizhia, which began in June, failed to even reach its initial objective at the city of Tokmak, despite the delivery of weapons the Ukrainians long desired, such as Western main battle tanks, cluster bombs, and long-range missiles such as the Franco-British Storm Shadow and American ATACMS. Russia, meanwhile, demonstrated renewed momentum, if slowly, and an ability to absorb punishment. Russia may not be in position to win the war as Putin would have liked when it began, but it's still not lost it. Now, as 2024 begins, the pendulum has swung the other way, and Western hopes for Ukraine are starting to ebb, which is one of the reasons why renewed military aid is becoming more and more controversial in the United States. As the prospects for victory look bleaker for Ukraine, the country is again being forced to turn to its wits to give it an extra edge, and to adapt to some of Russia's new methods of waging war. In comes the decoy strategy. Let's take a look at these decoys and why they have become such a necessity for both sides. The war in Ukraine has proven that drones have become one of the most important parts of the modern battlefield, confirming the results seen in the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia in 2020, when the former used them to completely reverse its traditional military disadvantage. In contrast, Russia paid comparatively little heed to drones when its war began. Its military doctrine heavily emphasizes artillery and tanks. Ukraine's use of drones quickly proved how vulnerable these traditional arms can be when they are improperly supported. Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drones made quick work of slow-moving Russian convoys around Kyiv. In April 2022, these drones reportedly played a role in the sinking of the cruiser Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, by distracting the ship's air defense systems and providing targeting information for the Ukrainian Neptune missiles, which delivered the killing blows. Later, Ukraine proved the mettle of smaller, cheaper first-person view FPV drones controlled by an operator wearing a headset. These drones can provide surveillance and coordinates for artillery and act as loitering munitions in a kamikaze role. Ukraine has taken out many of Russia's armored assets using these devices, including some of the few BMP-T Terminator tanks that it has deployed in the war. Other innovative uses of drones included outfitting them with Cold War-era anti-tank grenades, guided by 3D printed fins, or even converting old anti-aircraft guns into anti-personnel weapons with the assistance of drone targeting. However, as the Ukrainians invested in their drone forces, Russia gradually realized its vulnerability in this area, especially as it had fewer ballistic and cruise missiles to call upon in the wake of Western sanctions. To that end, Russia began investing heavily in purchases of Iranian Shahed 136 drones as 2022 went on. It was the start of a trend. As the war enters its third year, Russia is gradually gaining superiority in drone warfare, and this has serious implications for some of Ukraine's most valuable military assets. Russia now reportedly produces between 330 and 350 Shahed drones on a monthly basis. According to Vadim Skibitsky, the second-in-command at Ukraine's defense intelligence, Russia is reported to have produced over 22,000 of them through 2023. The Shahed 136 is a loitering munition that entered service in 2021. It's relatively small, with a 3.5-meter length and 2.5-meter wingspan. It has a total weight of 200 kilograms and can carry a warhead between 36 and 50 kilograms in weight. Its range is between 1,000 and 2,500 kilometers, with a service ceiling of 4. Its main role is as an attack arm against stationary ground targets according to preset coordinates. It has no remote control. The drone is launched from a rack of 5. As the intensity of Russian missile bombardments began to wane, the Shahed 136 increasingly took to the skies. Between January and March 2023, near the height of Russia's attacks on Ukraine's civilian power grid, missiles of various types made up about 60% of the ammunitions, with Shahed drones making up the remaining 40%. Between April and June of 2023, the number reversed. Shahed drones made up 60% of air attacks, and missiles the remaining 40%. Although these drones are not nearly as fast or capable, they are much cheaper, and the arrival of the Shahed and other kamikaze loitering munitions on the battlefield heralds the coming of an era where the cost of precision strikes will be much lower than they were in the past. Russia is further adapting the Shahed 136. Toward the end of 2023, Ukraine was hit with waves of these devices that have stealth modifications to help them better infiltrate Ukrainian air defenses. Ukrainian officials downplayed these modified Shahed drones, claiming only that their new black color made them less visible to the naked eye. However, defense officials quietly admitted that this black material was at least partially radar absorbent. The material improves on the Shahed's stealthy design, where the body merges into the wing. This coating, likely founded on carbon-based stealth paint, makes these newer Shahed drones more difficult for Ukrainian radars to detect, especially when they are flying close to the ground, as they were designed to do. In addition to large Shahed drones, Russia has also geared up its procurement of smaller FPV drones. In May 2023, a Russian state-owned defense company announced that it will be making at least 3,000 FPV drones per month. Russia also began ramping up production of FPV drones through volunteer groups, which were capable of making thousands of drones per month as well. Ukraine once had an advantage in FPV drones, but that advantage started to dwindle throughout 2023. In November, Ukrainian FPV drone pilots fighting in Donetsk Oblast began claiming that Russia was now fielding them in greater numbers than their own side. Their drones are always in the air, day and night. We can see they've implemented serial production of drones for reconnaissance, surveillance, and for strikes, claimed a Ukrainian drone platoon commander in the area while speaking to Reuters under his codename Comrade. According to Comrade, the Russians now have twice the number of FPV drones as Ukraine's troops, at least in the Bakhmut area. Comrade was far from the only soldier saying this. Ukraine's forces began complaining about a lack of FPV drones as 2023 wound down. Another drone operator in the area, who went by the codename BIZZARE, said that it had now become a common occurrence to only have 2 or 3 drones to use against 10 identified targets. Russia's greater investment in FPV drones has exposed vulnerabilities in Ukrainian provision methods. While the Ukrainian government has funded the manufacture of larger, higher-flying, longer-range drones to conduct surveillance and priority assault missions, it has not done the same with the smaller, tactical-level FPV drones. Instead, the Ukrainian armed forces have procured these devices from civic organizations and the donations of private individuals. Often, Ukrainian soldiers themselves will pay for the drones. Russia's greatly increased drone capability means that it now has better surveillance than it did before the start of the war. Russia has increased its capabilities in other ways as well. Ammunition shortages have forced Russia to rely less on World War II-style saturation fire methods with its artillery. By the start of 2023, Russia had reduced its volume of artillery fire by 75% from the wartime high seen in the spring and summer of 2022. To compensate for the shortage, Russia got smarter about how to use its artillery. Instead of its usual methods, Russia has adapted to using Krasnopol laser-guided 152mm artillery shells to deliver more accurate strikes on Ukrainian artillery and defensive positions. According to a report by the Royal United Services Institute, by May 2023, the Russians were using their new shells in conjunction with Lancet loitering munitions to better target Ukrainian artillery and other important equipment. For the Ukrainians, adapting to these changes has proven challenging. In 2022, they were the masters of precision strikes with HIMARS and their superiority in drone warfare. While Russia's attacks were comparatively uncoordinated, that advantage waned significantly the following year and was one of the reasons why the offensive in Zaporizhia proved so disappointing for Ukraine and its Western allies. Russia's improved ability to conduct precision warfare, thanks to its emphasis on drones and its increased use of laser-guided artillery, has forced the Ukrainian armed forces to find adaptations of their own. One of the methods seems like it could come right out of World War II, when the Allies used dummy vehicles and artillery to confuse the Nazi war planners, especially in the build-up to the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. In September 2023, Ukrainian forces released footage of one of Russia's Shahed drones diving towards what looked like an air defense system. The drone barely missed its target, exploding in a large fireball a few meters away. However, even if the loitering munition had found its mark, it would have been in vain, because the supposed air defense system was a dummy. Ukraine's dummy equipment includes much more than air defense systems. A report for CNN also showed a dummy American towed howitzer made up of modified drain pipes. These are far from the only dummy weapons that Ukraine has put into service. Ukraine's HIMARS systems have long been a high-priority target for Russia. None of them have yet been damaged, however. This success comes partially because HIMARS is designed to be difficult to target because of its high mobility. Nevertheless, the Ukrainians are taking no chances. Kyiv has manufactured units of wooden, replica HIMARS. These decoys are then attached to wooden trucks and hang around near the front. The presence of these replicas serves to confuse the enemy and protect the real launchers. Ukraine was fielding these dummies as early as the summer of 2022, when precision HIMARS attacks on high-value Russian targets began to change the tempo of the war. Tanks are another arm which the Ukrainians have made decoys of. These decoys are often made of collapsible wood and extremely lifelike. Anton Geroshenko, an advisor to the Ukrainian government, said in an interview with The Economist that one would not be able to tell that these devices are dummies even from a distance of 5 meters. Ukraine has also taken a page right out of the playbook of the D-Day preparations. Part of those preparations included creating a fake army with inflatable equipment, codenamed Operation Fortitude. Wood replicas work, but they come at the cost of being heavy and harder to maintain. Vehicles are needed to transport them, and a lot of valuable labor time is spent assembling and disassembling them. By contrast, inflatable decoys are cheaper and can sometimes be carried by a single man, allowing them to deploy much more rapidly. However, these dummy vehicles are also far more sophisticated than their World War II-era ancestors. One of Ukraine's suppliers for its inflatable dummies, a Czech company called Inflatech, uses flexible reflectors which simulate the heat of a gun that has just fired its projectile. These dummies are even capable of producing radar signatures. The products seem to be working, because Inflatech has seen its business increase by 30% since the start of the Russian invasion. Inflatech's offerings include 30 different products, ranging from tanks, armored vehicles, aircraft, artillery, and large weapons. They are typically made from light materials such as artificial silk, which will keep their weight low. 100-kilogram weights are common for its products. The decoys are usually operated by a team of 4 soldiers and can be unwrapped or inflated within 10 minutes. Tanks are far from the only devices which can be simulated with inflatables. Artillery, mortars, and even machine guns are capable of being replicated in this way. One of the biggest values of the dummy weapons comes in their cost to manufacture compared against their cost to destroy. To illustrate, Iranian Shahed drones are extremely cost-effective. They typically cost between $20,000 and $50,000 apiece. By October 2022, it had cost Ukraine more to shoot down the drones than it had cost Russia to launch them. Russia spent a range of $11.6 to $17.9 million on these operations. Ukraine spent about $28 million countering them. Russia's increased use of drones since then adds to the financial pressure. The CNN report pointed out that a real towed howitzer could cost $2 million to $4 million apiece. Tanks can cost even more. A modern Abrams tank can cost up to $10 million. A Leopard can cost $6 million and a Challenger can cost about $5 million. A HIMARS system costs about $5 million apiece. Meanwhile, each GMLRS rocket that can be loaded into HIMARS can cost $100,000 apiece. ATACMS missiles, which are also loaded into HIMARS, can cost $1.3 to $1.7 million each, depending on the range and guidance system. There are many other expensive pieces of equipment that are high-priority targets for Russia's much cheaper drone forces. The dummy howitzer, on the other hand, costs only $1,000, which puts the overall math into perspective. The inflatable dummies from Inflatech can be much more expensive. The products the company makes for training purposes can cost $100,000 apiece. This is more expensive than many of Russia's drones, but even if these are destroyed, they are much more expendable than losing a real tank, artillery piece, or air defense system. And the decoys have proven effective in their purpose of depleting Russian ammunition. As early as the summer of 2022, before Russia started to ramp up its drone capabilities, Ukraine was deploying the wooden replica HIMARS systems. That summer, Defense Minister Shoigu personally ordered Ukraine's HIMARS units to be a priority after they had demonstrated their effectiveness against critical Russian military infrastructure. Moscow has repeatedly bragged about destroying these systems. At one point, Shoigu and other Russian commanders announced that a new successful strike had been conducted on HIMARS or other Western rocket artillery systems almost on a weekly basis. An American diplomat commented in a Washington Post report from that time about Russia's braggadocio. They've claimed to have hit more HIMARS than we've even sent. Although Russia has long had a history of inflating its combat performance, the Post noted that the Ukrainian decoys probably accounts for some of the confusion. George Barros, a military researcher at the Institute for the Study of War, commented, "If the Russians think they hit a HIMARS, they will claim they hit a HIMARS. Russian forces very well may be overstating their battle damage assessments after hitting HIMARS decoys." In the first year of the war, these decoys proved particularly effective at degrading Russian combat effectiveness. Russia was using its missiles far more frequently in those days, and according to Ukrainian officials, the Russian armed forces had indeed wasted expensive caliber cruise missiles on the dummies. Each expensive missile used on a fake HIMARS represented a massive drain on resources for the Russian war machine. It's an excellent example of the asymmetric warfare that Ukraine has needed to practice against its larger enemy. Ukraine has other options to make HIMARS decoys too. Inflatech specializes in making reproductions of Soviet-era equipment. However, it has since put inflatable HIMARS replicas into its product line. This might be one of the reasons why the company's CEO, Wojtek Fresser, expects to see double-digit growth for the next 3 to 5 years. In the summer of 2022, the company produced about 50 decoys a month. NATO countries are its typical customer, and Fresser did not confirm that his company's products had made their way to Ukraine, but he did say that he could imagine sending an imperiled partner country inflatable decoys. Russia has since been more selective in the way that it deploys its missiles, but the decoys are equally effective against drones. The Shahed or Russian-manufactured Lancet drones, despite being comparatively cheap, are much more expensive than many of the Ukrainian decoys, turning the attritional maths against the invader. The use of decoys against cheaper FPV drones is also effective. Although the costs are not as lopsided in this way, the Ukrainians have used decoys as more than cost sinks for their enemy. Decoys confuse surveillance drones and provide false targeting information to Russian artillery, getting them to waste valuable shells and rockets. Decoys also serve in their age-old role of confusing the enemy as to Ukrainian intentions. Russian FPV drones might detect artillery seemingly stationed to fire on a certain position, leaving other positions vulnerable to the real attack. Russia hasn't neglected dummies either, and Moscow has been putting these kinds of decoys into practice for a long time prior to the war in Ukraine. In September 2023, a drone-captured video circulating on social media, purportedly by Ukraine's 116th Mechanized Brigade, showed inflatable Russian T-72 tanks. The brigade warned Ukraine's armed forces to be careful about how they use their ammunition in response to these decoys. Russian forces have also been known to use dummies of fighter jets like the MiG-31 and the S-300 missile system. The Russians have used more extensive decoys as well, creating simulated radar stations. New technology has made decoys a much more expensive acquisition than that seen in the past. No World War II-style decoy would fool modern surveillance systems. High-resolution infrared and thermal imaging can easily spot fakes. As we mentioned before, modern decoys manufactured by companies like Inflatech mitigate some of these disadvantages, but as surveillance of the battlefield becomes easier thanks to ubiquitous drones, both sides in the war are trying to improve their decoys, creating a new type of arms race. In the T-72 example given previously, the Russians attempted to conceal two of the dummies with camouflage materials and some foliage, but because Russia left them out in the open, they were easy to spot as fakes. High-resolution imagery revealed that they were obviously inflated devices, with smooth sides and corners. Even an untrained eye would be able to spot the difference between a real T-72 and the fake seen in these images. One Ukrainian company producing decoy artillery said that in order to trick modern surveillance methods, decoys needed to be covered in nets and surrounded by dugout trenches to produce more of an impression that they are the real devices. Leaving inflated equipment out in the open was insufficient. As 2024 ramps up, both Ukraine and Russia will continue to improve their drone warfare capabilities. With these improvements, both sides will become more adept at finding targets of opportunity. Anti-drone weapons and tactics will see increased development in the long term, but in the short term, expect both sides to use new and improved decoys to try to confuse and deplete the other's ammunition. What improvements do you think will be made to decoy technology? How will both sides continue to adapt to the other's increased ability to conduct low-cost precision strikes? November 2023, a Ukrainian soldier is in position to take a sniper shot that will change the world. He's armed with a new rifle named Horizon's Lord, and he's almost 2.5 miles away from his target. The sniper adjusts the rifle's calibration and lines up the shot. He pulls the trigger. In less than 10 seconds, his bullet speeds toward the target, hitting dead center and racking a confirmed kill. The Ukrainian soldier has just broken the world record for the longest ever successful sniper shot by a considerable distance, and it's all thanks to the rifle he holds in his hands. So what makes Horizon's Lord so special, and why could this rifle help Ukraine terrorize Russian President Vladimir Putin's army on the battlefields of Ukraine? Let's find out. We'll start by taking a closer look at the rifle itself. On the surface, there's little to distinguish the Horizon's Lord from any other sniper rifle. It's made by the Ukrainian company Mayak and is described as a custom sniper rifle that can be configured to fire rounds of several different calibers. That alone makes it interesting. The variance in calibers allows the rifle to be used both as a sniper weapon system and an anti-material rifle. In other words, the rifle is capable of carrying armor-piercing and incendiary rounds as its standard rounds that are used on a human target. But beyond that, the rifle doesn't look particularly special from the outside looking in. According to Mayak, it's between 59.84 and 71.65 inches long, depending on whether the butt is folded in or not, and can be configured with one of two barrel lengths. The 41.33-inch barrel is ideal for various rounds, including a special round we'll dig into later, though the sniper will need to switch to the 47.24-inch barrel if they want to fire 14.5 by 114 rounds. The rifle's weight is also variable, coming in at 15.5 kilograms when loaded with a single bullet and rising to 17 kilograms if the sniper loads a full magazine. It can also fire surprisingly quickly for a sniper rifle. A talented sniper can rattle off up to 8 rounds per minute, though it's unlikely most would use that capability unless firing on targets for which absolute pinpoint precision isn't a priority. That may seem strange to say in the context of standard sniper rifles until you remember that the Horizon's Lord was made to be as effective as an anti-material weapon as it is a rifle to take out human targets. According to its manufacturers, the rifle can destroy anti-tank missile systems and large-caliber machine guns, as well as be used to damage lightly armored military vehicles, all larger targets that allow the sniper to benefit from the rapid firing rate. But it's the effective range that really sets the rifle apart. Mayak claims that a good sniper can hit a target that's up to 8,202 feet away. For context, the Macmillan TAC-50, which is an anti-material rifle that previously held the record for the longest ever sniper kill, has an effective range of 5,905 feet. The Horizon's Lord supposedly adds 2,700 feet to that range. Naturally, that means the rifle had attracted a lot of attention before it was ever used on the battlefield. Mayak first presented it at the International Exhibition of Arms and Security in June 2021 in Kyiv. The event was notably held before Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, suggesting that Mayak foresaw a need for a weapon that would allow Ukrainian soldiers to fight over long distances. Regardless, the weapon attracted a lot of attention from the beginning, though it was seen as more of a technical demonstration of what might be possible, rather than a viable weapon that could be used in combat just yet. Ukraine has proven that assumption wrong. Interestingly, it also appears that the Horizon's Lord rifle could meet the specifications of a proposed rifle that the United States wants to acquire. According to the Defense Post, the US military is currently engaging several defense industry partners to develop a new long-range sniper rifle that could be introduced to the battlefield. That rifle would need to have an effective range of 5,520 feet, a range that the Horizon's Lord easily exceeds, and would need to offer a modular design. Again, the Horizon's Lord seems perfect. It's a customizable rifle that can be chambered with several types of rounds. The only sticking point would be length and weight. The US wants a rifle that's no more than 56 inches long and weighs less than 10 kilograms. The Horizon's Lord exceeds both of those requirements, though its exceptional range may just be high enough that the US military will overlook its length and weight issues to bring it into the fold anyway. After all, they'll have noticed it being used to break a record just like the rest of the world has noticed. That brings us back to the kill. It was taken by a Ukrainian soldier named Vyacheslav Kowalski. Far from being a member of Ukraine's special forces, Kowalski is a 58-year-old ex-businessman, but he clearly has the spirit of an elite soldier. According to NDTV, Kowalski waited for several hours just to have a chance of lining up a shot. When the opportunity arose, his target stood a staggering 12,468 feet away, the length of 2 Brooklyn bridges stacked end to end. Obviously, hitting his target was the foremost thing on Kowalski's mind, but in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, he also revealed that he hoped that making the shot would have a huge impact on the Russian mentality. "I was thinking that Russians would not know that that's what Ukrainians are capable of," he told the newspaper before signing off with a chilling message. "Let them sit at home and be afraid." Kowalski also provided more details about the circumstances that led to him taking his now famous shot. Along with his spotter, he spent several hours observing Russian soldiers as they chopped wood. He could have killed any one of them if he wanted, though both he and his spotter decided the soldiers in his sights were too low-ranking to justify the round. They wanted to hit an officer. The duo continued to search until they found another group of Russian soldiers far off in the distance. A quick scan revealed that one of the soldiers was giving orders to the rest of the group. The Ukrainians had found their officer. Kowalski received the simple instruction from his spotter: "You can." But he didn't, at least not immediately. Using special software, the sniper measured the distance to his target, with the software also providing him with meteorological data and allowed him to determine how much of an impact the wind, temperature, humidity, and curvature of the Earth would have on his bullet once he pulled the trigger. Then he took a test shot. That shot revealed that he'd gotten the wind speed wrong, which was all he needed to know. After making a couple of adjustments, Kowalski loaded his rifle with a bullet measuring 6.2 inches long. Aimed, fired. The bullet fired out of the rifle at a speed of 960 miles per hour, hurtling towards its target. Just 9 seconds later, the Russian officer was down, and Kowalski had recorded the longest ever distance for a successful sniper hit. Kowalski had reportedly already started packing away his equipment before his spotter confirmed that the shot had found the mark. It sounds like a story out of a film, and one that could easily have been made up as an attempt to use it as propaganda to instill fear into Russian troops, but there's a twist. Footage of the shot exists. The footage was released on X, formerly Twitter, and appears to confirm everything that the sniper claims. Admittedly, the footage is blurry. Around 2 seconds into the video, the viewer hears the mighty bang of the rifle being fired. Nothing happens for several seconds after that, until the Russian officer, who's circled in the video, drops. Assuming that the shot is valid and the existence of footage suggests that it is, the shot broke the previous record of 11,614 feet held by a Canadian sniper who claimed his kill in Iraq in 2017. In fact, it doesn't just break the record, it shatters it by about 850 feet, showcasing just how powerful Horizon's Lord could be as a tool for Ukraine to instill fear into Russian soldiers. After all, this isn't a rifle that's used to fire from conventional sniping positions. Any Russian who's out in the open in Ukraine would be in danger. They would never know if the sights of a Horizon's Lord rifle are being trained on them. And even more terrifyingly, they'd have no way of knowing that a sniper is even scanning their location. However, not all are convinced that the shot is as record-breaking as Ukraine claims. For instance, NDTV notes that a US Marines sniper instructor named Steve Walsh isn't convinced that the shot was as skillful as Ukraine claims, or that the weapon used to achieve it is as impressive as it seems. For conventional sniping, there are so many variables that are hard to quantify, he says. So the reality is anything over about 1,300 meters, roughly 4,265 feet, can be more luck than skill. Perhaps he has a point. However, the footage appears to show a confirmed hit, regardless of how much luck or skill was involved. and according to Brad Millard, a ballistics expert based in the US, the 9 seconds it takes for the bullet to reach its target seems accurate based on the reported exit velocity of 960 miles per hour. Let's assume that it wasn't just luck that led to the shot landing. Instead, it was a combination of a 58-year-old sniper's skill and the weapon he had in his hands. Naturally, that brings us to another question. What makes the Horizon's Lord so special? We already have one of our answers from the examination of the rifle conducted earlier in the video. Its effective range is a staggering 8,202 feet, higher than any equivalent anti-material rifle used in the world today. A comparison to the 2 long-range rifles in service in the US military today showcases just how impressive the Horizon's Lord's range truly is. According to the Defense Post, the US currently uses either the M107 or Mk15 rifles for hitting targets at extreme long ranges. The Mk15 has an effective range of 5,906 feet, with the M107 capable of hitting targets 6,562 feet away. The Horizon's Lord has them both beaten substantially, adding 1,640 feet to the M107's range. For context, that adds the equivalent of 5.46 American football fields to the rifle's range. A staggering distance that makes it easy to see why Putin's troops will fear the prospect of it arriving on the Ukrainian battlefield. However, beyond the extreme range, the Horizon's Lord isn't especially unique or innovative in its design. Mayak hasn't reinvented anything in terms of how rifles are built, with the gun using previously existing technology, meaning that any other country could have made it. The secret isn't in the rifle itself, it's in the bullets. And bullets is the correct term to use here because the Horizon's Lord is capable of firing several types of rounds, which lends it the versatility it needs to be used both as an anti-material and anti-personnel rifle. Let's start with the bullet Kowalski used to achieve his record-breaking shot. According to Forces.net, experts believe that the sniper had configured his rifle so that it could fire 12.7 by 114 rounds. That type of cartridge was specifically highlighted by Mayak in the technical documentation it released for the rifle, with the company claiming it's been specially designed to destroy material targets and for use in counter-sniping combat. It says that the cartridge significantly exceeds the combat characteristics of the 14.5 by 114 cartridges typically used in anti-material sniper rifles by up to 35%, with the company noting that it has a smaller recoil momentum. That's important because it reduces the impact of snatching when the rifle is fired, an issue that can lead to a carefully calibrated rifle shooting off target because of the sheer force the bullet creates when it exits the chamber. The cartridge also allows the shooter to equip their rifle with a shorter barrel. This may not seem especially important until you realize that a shorter barrel reduces the rifle's overall weight. A lighter rifle is easier to transport, as well as being easier to adjust should the sniper need to change position to get a clearer shot. A shorter barrel also has another advantage. It opens up more positioning opportunities. Snipers won't have to worry as much about having a longer barrel that could potentially collide against cover or peek out far enough that an enemy soldier will be able to see the rifle before it's fired. Then there's the combination of case and round. As mentioned earlier, the 12.7 by 114 cartridge that Kowalski used is about 6 inches long. According to Forces.net, those cartridges have a large case coupled with a comparatively small round. Why does this matter? A larger case allows the sniper to pack the cartridge with far more gunpowder than they might be able to use with another cartridge, allowing for the round to be propelled out of the rifle at an extremely fast rate. Mayak says that the sniper's gunpowder choice could allow a bullet fired from Horizon's Lord to reach a maximum speed of 2,460 miles per hour, assuming a bullet weight of 750 grams and a barrel length of 47.2 inches for a shot of more than 10,170 feet. For context, that's supersonic speed. Specifically, it means a bullet fired out of the Horizon's Lord could move at 3.2 times the speed of sound, making it almost impossible to counter with laser-based defenses. Realistically, the 12.7 by 114 cartridge is never going to reach that speed in practice. The 10,170 feet required to hit 2,460 miles per hour is beyond the Horizon Lord's effective range. Still, the fact that the cartridge can be packed with enough gunpowder to make this theoretically possible shows you just how impressive Mayak's new cartridge is. The Firearm blog digs deeper into what makes the cartridge so special. It points out that the cartridge is designed to offer a best-of-both-worlds situation. It notes that cartridges such as the .408 Chaitak and the .416 Barrett, though being excellent choices for extreme long-range sniping, are only useful for anti-personnel use. They have no armor-piercing qualities, meaning they're not viable as anti-material cartridges. Conversely, a dedicated anti-material cartridge, such as the 14.5x114, may be capable of taking out armored targets. However, its selection of special-use bullets is compromised by the fact that it has no precision bullets available, making it less useful over extremely long distances. That's why Mayak chose a 50 caliber barrel for the Horizon's Lord. With a 50 caliber barrel, the company could create a multitask cartridge, the 12.7x114, that's capable of carrying long-range precision bullets, as well as several special military bullets that are usually used in guns that have .50 BMG barrels. From there, all they had to do was take a 14.5x114 cartridge and neck it down. That reduced the cartridge's length while still maintaining the bottom end of the cartridge that can be used to hold a large amount of gunpowder. Obviously, this matters for the propulsion needed to send the bullet flying over longer distances than ever before. However, there are other benefits for having this neck-down cartridge for the Horizon's Lord. The 12.7x114 is a ballistically superior cartridge that maintains a flatter trajectory in flight than the 14.5x114. While that doesn't mean it's unaffected by atmospheric conditions, it's less affected by the wind and can better retain its energy over a long distance. Having a smaller cartridge that's still capable of traveling over large distances also meant the Horizon's Lord could be made smaller than it otherwise would be. Again, that makes it easier to transport. The gun can fit into any common vehicle, with both rifle and cartridges being easier to carry over the battlefield. So the Horizon's Lord has an impressive and innovative cartridge. But even though the rifle itself isn't as innovative, it's still an impressive piece of kit. Take its modular design as an example. Though the 12.7x114 is clearly the star of this sniper show, Mayak understands that it's not always going to be the best choice. That's why they've incorporated modularity into the Horizon Lord's design. As the firearm blog points out, a sniper can switch out the rifle's barrel and bolt head easily, changing the rifle's caliber in a matter of minutes. What does this mean in practice? With the appropriate barrels and bolt heads, the Horizon's Lord caliber can be changed to the .416 Barrett and .46 Steyr, and even to the .50 BMG that inspired the 12.7x114 cartridge's design. It can also be converted to fire 14.5x114 rounds, a useful feature given that those rounds are more likely readily available to Ukrainian soldiers, as well as even larger 23x115 rounds. It's also important to note that the customized cartridge Mayak has created for the Horizon's Lord will rapidly take a heavy toll on its default barrel. Enabling rapid switching of barrels thus serves as a practical use in terms of allowing for quick replacements when needed, as well as offering the rifle immense versatility that makes it usable in several situations. And the versatility extends to the 12.7x114 cartridge. According to Mayak, several machine guns, including the Soviet-era KPV heavy machine gun that's seeing heavy use in the Ukrainian war, can be converted to fire the 12.7x114 cartridge instead of their typical 14.5x114s. There's just one caveat to all of this design ingenuity. Mayak hasn't released any test footage to show how accurate the Horizon's Lord is when it's switched to be able to fire 14.5x114 or .50 BMG cartridges. That means we don't know if the impressive range achieved with a 12.7x114 cartridge is replicated when the rifle uses something larger. Nevertheless, it all adds up to an impressive package. A sniper rifle that has a unique cartridge that isn't available to Russia, as well as a gun that technically has no set caliber thanks to its switchable barrels. For Ukraine, that means their soldiers get a gun that's light enough for them to carry in the field and can be converted as needed if they run out of 12.7x114 cartridges. But perhaps the most surprising thing about Mayak's innovation is that the concept of the 12.4x114 cartridge isn't as new as it might appear. Surprisingly, nobody else has come up with it before. In a YouTube video published by The Sun, a UK newspaper, a British military expert explains that the 12.7x114's case capacity allows it to contain a lot of powder, while its design means it has a flat trajectory. We know this already. However, he also brings up that the Germans came up with a similar idea during World War II. The cartridge he demonstrates is a .50 cartridge that has a large case that tapers into an extremely thin neck. At the end of that neck lies a bullet, one that looks comedically small in comparison to the rest of the cartridge, with the expert pointing out that the Germans did exactly what Mayak did for their 12.7x114 cartridge, necking the case down to fit the bullet while providing a case that could hold plenty of gunpowder. Ultimately, the expert concludes that there's no technical innovation in the Horizon's Lord itself. Instead, the success of the rifle comes down to Mayak's intelligent selection of components coupled with the unique cartridge the company has created for the gun. All of this leaves us with one more question. What does the record-breaking shot achieved with the Horizon's Lord mean for Russia? Putin's soldiers now know that Ukraine's snipers are equipped with a weapon that can kill soldiers at distances never before thought possible. They also know that the Horizon's Lord isn't just an anti-personnel rifle, it's an anti-material rifle that can be used to take out armored vehicles at great distances. So Russia now has to deal with Ukraine having a capability on the field that isn't available to them. And though it's possible that Russia's weapons manufacturers may be trying to replicate the Horizon's Lord and, crucially, Mayak's unique cartridge, the odds are that they're not going to succeed unless they can get their hands on either for reverse engineering. However, the rifle's impact may not be as devastating as it could have been. After all, the war in Ukraine has seen heavy use of drones for attack and surveillance throughout. Those drones are as capable as a sniper's bullet of traveling extensive distances before striking a target, so it's possible that Russia may adapt by using its drones to hunt for Ukrainian sniper positions further afield, potentially allowing them to counter the use of the Horizon's Lord. It would be no different than the games of cat and mouse already being played out on the battlefield in Ukraine. Only now, Russia has to search much further afield to ensure its troops aren't going to be ambushed by Ukraine's new rifle. But what are your thoughts? Do you think the Horizon's Lord and its special cartridge provide Ukraine with a huge tactical advantage on the battlefield? Do you believe this was the gun responsible for breaking the world's sniping distance record, or is this an example of Ukraine creating the record to use as propaganda in its war with Russia?